Project LLL gameplay has sort of descended out of nowhere as the potential next big looter shooter open world MMO game. They're checking a lot of boxes. I have an interview with one of the people that is working on the game, outlining exactly what they're going for. We're going to be breaking it all down, looking at the gameplay. I am going to put all of the good information right here at the beginning of the video. If you consistently support this channel, keep in mind, I'll be out of town for a week, and we will do uploads the entire time I am gone. Make sure you check your subscriber feed once I'm back in town on the 28th of November after the holiday. This is a Reforge update. Project LLL looks to maybe be the next big looter shooter MMO, and an interview points to just how much they're trying to shake up the genre. If you like this quick update, be sure to hit subscribe and the bell button. That way you don't miss these quick uploads. So in an interview with project leader Cedar Jayan Bay, this is on the NC Soft website. That is who is building this game. They are known for Guild Wars 2, so folks looking for that longevity of an MMO can rest assured a company that understands how to do that is at the helm. But there's interesting things they have to say about the genre, what they're looking for with the world and the lore. So they want to apparently create a new genre. Quote, "We wanted to create a new genre that is completely different from the recently popular looter shooter or battle royale." And they incorporated a lot of big keywords. "We want to create a new market that is exclusive to NC with a new IP that incorporates the keywords shooter, MMO, and open world." So they want to touch all of those. They want to be a shooter, they want it to be an MMO, and they want it to be an open world. These are very lofty goals. How are they going to get there? Well, they want to combine elements from some of their previous games. "We are developing a project that combines different play styles and elements from NC's previous games, and we are very excited to share a sneak peek with our community." So the question would obviously be, how much is Guild Wars 2 going to play a factor here in keeping things going and having that longevity? I've always said, plenty of people can create amazing content loops and gameplay. I know you can create a character and guns and enemies, but how do you keep things going? Well, they are aiming at more than just PvE. They also make mention of PvP. "We want to create different types of play and experiences in which players either work together or compete against each other by utilizing the two elements of action that target and shoot at opponents and fractionalize and occupy space within the environment." So they are going for both things, and the size of the world is something that many people would consider. What, how big is the world going to be? Like, whenever you're playing a game like this, that is the question, is how big, how far can I go? Well, the world of LLL is a vast open world in which more than 30 kilometers of land area is seamlessly connected by a single environment. So more than 30 kilometers, for those of us that live stateside, that's about 18 miles of traversable area. Now, movement and loading is something that they are very cognizant of when making an area that large and making a world that will seemingly go on for a while. They said the core elements that make up the open world are uninterrupted loading and movement. To convey a seamless environment, we implemented content streaming and utilized the most cutting-edge rendering technology. Beyond that, they're also looking at using a buzzword that some people like and some people don't like: procedural generation. We've introduced a procedural creation method to provide content that reacts appropriately to the player situation instead of playing preset content on repeat with the open world environment. Now that is very ambitious, and to me it's interesting because that is something many are accustomed to. Whether you play Destiny or The Division, you're generally retreading areas and repeating missions and things that are very familiar. Now, Diablo 3 sort of pioneered the idea of being like, hey, go into a rift and it'll be random every time, modifiers, new themes every season. They're talking about having procedural generation in the world so that the content reacts to you appropriately instead of you just going and doing something that's preset and you just repeat it over and over again. There's also ongoing research into how just to utilize this technology. We are thinking about a tool that can reflect this procedural creation method in content production while also researching processes that allow for content to be produced automatically. That again sounds extremely lofty and ambitious. You're talking about procedural creation of content and automation of content creation. I have always said that the next big technological breakthrough for games, especially MMOs and ongoing games, is going to be something that actually allows the developers to make the content much quicker to keep up with player demand. And it sounds like NC Soft may have figured it out, or they're trying to figure it out, because that generally is the pain point. You can create a world and vast experiences with billions of permutations of what could happen, and in about a month's worth of time, the general public has combed over the game, and there's very little left for them to do unless you make things very slow, grindy, and arduous, which generally hurts experience and then drives down playtime. If they can actually do something with procedural content creation and automation, their game could be in a unique position. They're also using Unreal. They said that LLL utilizes Unreal Engine to work on advanced repairs, and we plan to continue to use the latest Unreal Engine to maintain it. They did extensive work and research into shooting mechanics. Real life shooting and impact was something that they really referenced. They said, quote, "We tried to capture the satisfaction and idealized experience of shooting." Well, what kind of game is this? Is it a sci-fi game? Is it a futuristic game? Well, they're classifying it as a sci-fi game with meaningful lore rooted in our world. So apparently, according to the interview, LLL is a sci-fi game, but it can be seen as a game that falls under a subgenre of alternative history. It takes place in a world that started with the idea that the history we know progressed differently due to particular events in the past. In LLL, a devastated soul, the 10th century Byzantine Empire, and the 23rd century are all blended together in the same lore. They kind of did this with Horizon Forbidden West. They imagined this future rooted in our world. This sounds like they're imagining a past that was very different that led to what we're going to be seeing in the game. Now, what inspired it? Many people will be happy to know that he said, "I personally referenced the novels Foundation and Dune in terms of the subject of the game. I tried to develop the story with themes of technology, human justice, and an alternate history as shown in Blade Runner, Total Recall, and The Man in the High Castle." So these are the inspiration for the story theme. So we've got good, I think, groundwork and foundation, and it's based on a real location. Seoul, it's spelled Seoul, Seoul. It's based on a real location. So there are going to be places that you'll go that are recreations of actual places you can go and see now, obviously reimagined in this alternate history. What was the goal of this gameplay video? Why did they release it? That's an excellent question, right? What are you trying to show us here? He said the concept of this video was to show the gameplay captured as is from start to finish without any artificial camera jumps or edits. Apart from the final scene, it showcases completely unaltered gameplay, which when I first saw this, I thought, no way, that's a full render. That's not gameplay. This is fake, right? What they're looking for is something that they hope that gamers are looking for. He said, "I think gamers these days are more interested in how a game actually plays than cinematic animations. Since this was the first reveal, I wanted to show the game itself without any exaggerations or polish. There will be a few more opportunities for us to share the development process like this. This is only the first step in our communication." So what do you think about what you've seen, what they said? Let us know in the comments below. They're currently looking at a launch window target of 2024. It's going to launch globally on PC and console. So here's my thoughts. The latest Project LLL gameplay looks incredibly promising as an open-world MMO looter shooter, but what's even more promising is their commentary on procedural generation for the game's content, as well as the creation of content, maybe even doing something that is automated. This might help them keep up with the demands of players who tend to be very ravenous when it comes to looter shooters. As always, be sure to check out Reforge Gaming, where I stream live. Hit subscribe and the bell button on this video, and I'll see you in the next one. And I'll see the rest of you right now. This game This game looks promising. We've talked about the First Ascendant, or whatever it's called, the First Ascendant, and obviously that one sort of went awry on us because it was designed by a company that's sort of known for like being like, hey, we do bad microtransactions. This game's designed by a company that did Guild Wars 2, right? They never made anything substantial ever, so consider me not trusting. Don't trust the gameplay. I mean, aside from what he said about that, because I looked at that gameplay and I said to Creech, I said, ain't nobody doing that level of lighting in an MMO. There's no freaking way. However, we do know that some companies are going to Unreal 5 specifically for the lighting. This looks worse than the First Ascendant. I don't know how you could say that. I think it looks really awesome. It looks like Destiny and The Division and Anthem all kind of slammed together. NC Soft is also doing the Horizon MMO. Yeah, you also have to consider that. NC Soft has been tapped to do the Horizon MMO, so apparently their experience with MMOs is something they're looking to capitalize on. Guild Wars 2 was ArenaNet. They just published it. Yeah, but if you're publishing a game, you're going to be at some level familiar with it, I would imagine, right? I would imagine. Lono will be out of town. Yeah, I will be out of town next week. What? Good to see you in the chat feed. Good to see you in the chat. From what I was told in my small MMO loop, I heard it's NC Soft's Blade and Soul since Guild Wars 2 is ArenaNet, which is themselves. Guild Wars 2 is isn't owned by NC anymore. Right, but if a publisher is behind an MMO and they decide to do their own MMO, like their expertise is going to come into play. They're going to have resources, research, backlogs of information. They're going to have data sets and things to say, this is what helped Guild Wars go the distance. This is what helped the game be so successful. So you don't have to be the developer to be like, well, we worked on it. You know, no, Frickmas Blend will be available for order once I am back in town. So there was actually an order yesterday that I was supposed to print this morning, and I have not done that. I need to make sure and do that. We can always do that and drop it off when we leave town, but there was one order. We are not taking orders today. At least it shouldn't let you order. Creature may not have turned it off just yet, so we may be able to actually take orders today now that I think about it, since I didn't print that guy's order. NC Soft is probably looking at Blade and Soul's MMO tech and numbers, since it was the only popular MMO they have left. I can't look at an UE5 essentially highlight reel and get hyped anymore. People laughed at. Oof. What are we saying oof to? I like, we can print it. I can print it and we can package it up and go be outside of you know, today. Driving fine. We'll drive. By the way, you guys like this shirt? I think this shirt's awesome. This is from Into the AM. Please continue to support them. I was really pleased. I don't wear a lot of white shirts, but this one is, I think, pretty sick. Use the shirt command or go to intotheam.com/Lono, or just use code Lono over at Into the AM and order some shirts. That supports me. They did do another activation with us. We're very pleased to be continuing to work with them. Give me 1 second. I got to put this on the camera. Little streamer trick. You take a piece of paper and you put it on the viewfinder of the camera, and it turns off that back LCD so the cameras don't run as hot. You're copying me. That's the one I ordered. Did you order yesterday, Team Mangrove? If you guys ordered using my code yesterday, thank you so much. Continue to use my code or my link when you go there. The only order I'm taking is order 66. There you go. This is far out from potential release. The game could be said, that could be said about any game. We're going to need to know 100 metric tons of info to know if this is good or not. I think the most important part of the LL gameplay trailer announcement interview thing that I read, The most important part about it is that they're looking into using procedural generation in two ways. Number one, they don't want you just going to content that is wrote, rehearsed, and repeated. That's one of the obvious tropes of an MMO. That's one of the obvious tropes of a looter shooter is you're running a mission, you're fighting a boss, you're killing enemies that you've killed thousands of times before. So the fact that they're going to be doing that, procedural generation, to make the content itself feel fresh and new and different every time, and that it's responding to you appropriately, is what they said. The other thing that they said in the interview that I thought was extremely interesting is they're looking into using procedural generation to create content and even looking into automation to create content. I've always said one of the biggest things that needs to happen in the realm of MMOs and ongoing games is technological solutions for creating content fast enough to keep up with people, because it doesn't matter how fast the developers work, you're going to eviscerate the content way faster than they can make it. You will always be able to play missions, quests, and go on loot pursuits faster than developers can create it. The only way they can slow you down is through artificial sort of grind means where, well, then it becomes unenjoyable, and who wants to play when you're not making that progress? They're sort of putting you in these miniature hamster wheels all the time, and you're like, well, I don't want to play this. I just remembered the original Rise of the Triad had procedural generated options for maps. That's the oldest example I can think of. Time Splitters maybe was the first game that had it. I think that that's the future of games like this. I generally think that's the future of live service MMO type games. I do. If you guys haven't hit like yet this morning, make sure and do that. Also, if you're interested in chatting with the audience and me, make sure you're on live chat. You won't see what everybody's saying if you're on top chat. So always make sure and go through that ritual of hitting like and then getting off of top chat. Why they've called it LLL, they must know what they are doing when they're using that as a title. It puts me off. It's like saying the title of the new game is a pile of poo. I mean, who knows what it stands for, right? It's, again, you're dealing with a company that doesn't speak English, so they might not even be thinking in the realm of internet meme. It could stand for something else. I can't get hyped about a game coming in 2024 with procedural generation. Procedural generation equals bland. I don't think procedural generation always equals bland. I think one of the earliest tests we're going to see with procedural generation is with the dungeons in Diablo 4. 150-something dungeons, all procedurally generated so that you're always having a new experience. So that'll be one of the first tests of whether or not a game can create its world in that way. Now, when you go and do the Rift system in Diablo 3, you sort of know what you're signing up for, but I think Diablo 4 will be one of the first tests to say, can you create a substantive experience? You know what I'm saying? Is Into the AM replacing 80s Tees? No, we still work with 80s Tees. You can use code Lono over there at 80s Tees. They've got an amazing Christmas collection. I've been wearing Christmas t-shirts a little early to remind people, hey, if you want to get some funny pop culture, Star Wars, comic book, whatever, Christmas t-shirts so that you can wear them after Thanksgiving, put your orders in now. 80stees.com. Just use code Lono for 30% off. Please use my code at 80s Tees. Don't do their little spin wheel email thing to get a discount. I don't get credit for that. Isn't Starfield going that route with their planes? I'm not quite sure if they've outlined exactly how Starfield is going to be doing their procedural generation. I don't know if we know anything exactly yet on what that's going to look like. It could be that they're doing something similar. Again, I think that that's the way forward. I don't think you can create content fast enough to keep up with the average player base anymore. I was just about to say, keep that same bland energy when Diablo 4 drops, right? Starfield only use it to make the game. Yeah, I thought they said they used procedural generation to sort of make the game, but then everything else, well, not everything else, but they said it's the most handcrafted game they've ever made, did they not? For the planets I meant. Yeah, but I still think there's lots of handcrafted. Yeah, some planets, you meant to say planets, not planes. Some of the planets I believe are probably totally procedurally generated in Starfield. That's probably true. Balancing a procedural generation engine so that stuff isn't busted nor always samey, that can't be easy. Well, certainly no. No, because Procedural generation is always going to be able to be seen behind. You can see behind it. It's like, well, I know that this isn't handcrafted. You can kind of sense it, right? I went to ADST's site and searched into the AM and could not find the shirt. Which shirt? The one I'm wearing? I believe the one I'm wearing is one of the newer ones on the site. I tried to pick shirts that were totally available for everybody. Somebody in chat just said they ordered one. Which specific one are you talking? If you're talking about the one I'm wearing right now, they have one kind of like it called Blossom Temple Tea. No, yeah, Zen Garden Tea. This shirt is available on Into the AM. That's the name. Into the AM and 80s Tees are two different websites. Use the shirt command. The one with all the stars on it. Oh, the all-over print? I mean, the all-over print might be out of it. It might be gone now. If you go to Into the AM, go to Shop All and then go to all-over print tees. They have one called Infinite Matter. I see that one. No, mine is on there as a last chance. It's called Team Electric Tea. It's there. It's there, and it's as a last chance. It's still there. So go to intotheam.com/Lono, and then that's what you're looking for. I personally think using an AI to generate maps and then allowing devs to go in and tweak stuff sounds like a huge time saver, but letting the user do it at home, I'm skeptical. Well, we're not doing it. You might be misunderstanding what I said or what the guy said in the interview. He's not saying that we would be doing anything. What he's saying is that when you go into an area, the experience would procedurally generate and respond to you. So it would feel sort of like organic and alive, right? It would a mouse that's not a G502. You've grown as a person. I actually have two, you snarky Brit. I have this one from Rocat, and then I have this one from Rocat. I think the mouse command might link to both. We were wanting to work. Yeah, the Rocat Burst Pro Air. I don't know which one is the Burst Pro Air. One of these is. This one's wireless, and I don't use it as a wireless just because it's a pain in the butt to do, because then you got to charge it. Oh, this is the Cone. I use the Cone, Kone, and then the Burst Pro Air. Yeah, I use both. Good morning. How are you? Good morning, Alex. Aren't returnal biomes procedurally generated? No. The biomes well, yes and no. Yes and no. I want to answer this question with a little bit more nuance. So the returnal biomes are procedurally put together in a different order, but they're set pieces that are pre-built. So imagine in the first biome, you have set pieces 1 through 12, but they're not always in that order. It might be set piece 1, 3, 7, 8. You know what I mean? They're connected in different ways. So if you think of it as like you've got predetermined boxes and you just shuffle the order that they're all connected in. Lono says he's going to be gone for the holidays and you drop your membership. Membership has dropped significantly on this channel, and you are probably going to find a very different experience on this channel in December and maybe even more in the new year, because people just aren't doing it. They're not responding to our value offer, so we're gonna do more. We may do members only chats. We may do one live stream in the morning that's available to everybody, and then the second show will follow a premiere, and that second show will be members only. We're not quite sure what we're gonna do yet, but streaming 6 hours a day to member numbers that just aren't doing what we want, there's a lot of other ways to create YouTube content, and 6 hours is a lot of production time. So Creatures always said it. If you don't support something, don't be surprised if it disappears or diminishes in how often it shows up. And 6 hours of live streaming is a huge investment. We have multiple channels and multiple ways of creating content. And if you really like this, because I like this, I think this is where I shine as a content creator, then we're going to have to figure out ways to get folks to hit that button. It's kind of like a random number generator when using procedurally generated content. It does have a set base of rules to follow. Well, sure, it's not like you'd be playing Project LLL gameplay and suddenly a dinosaur shows up And it's like, well, how did that happen? It was procedurally generated. You know what I'm saying? All of a sudden, Chuck Norris walks in. You're like, I mean, it's procedurally generated, guys. It wouldn't be like that. There are parameters and rule sets that it works within. There are certain enemy types that can only show up, certain power thresholds that they can only use. Like, you're still going to be working within the confines of the game. It's just that instead of walking in a room and having the same enemy pop up and the same mini boss pop up and the same main boss at the end, they would want it to be a fresh experience every time. Sorcerer says the all-over print shirt you were wearing is being stopped soon, so they need to buy it. That's right. That's why we're working with Into the AM. I love the idea of getting a shirt, and then in a couple of weeks you can't get it anymore. Like, I love that sort of just soft urgency push. Like, you want this shirt? Gotta go buy it now, you know? If Chuck Norris just walks in, you're playing the greatest game ever, and you are going to lose. Sounds like the Free Guy video game logic. I enjoyed that movie, but it was hard to watch. People think they know how to make a movie about video games. Well, of course, and it's fiction. So, guys, do me a favor. If you've never been here before, we would love to have you weigh in on this subject. Is this the next big looter shooter? Looks like we're primarily streaming to people who have already subbed to the channel. We're not seeing a big jump in subs just yet. If you want to talk in my chat, you have to be a subscriber. Subscribing is totally free, by the way. You don't have to pay any money to do that. So hit that button, hit the like button, join the conversation. Valheim crypts are procedurally generated, says Ferk Malurf. Sometimes there are stairs to nowhere. See, that doesn't happen in Diablo. Like, the rift system in Diablo seems to be pretty polished. Like, I don't know if... Well, obviously, there's dead ends, right? I mean, there's dead ends in content. There's a really funny clip of Doc recently. He finds a dead end on a map, and he just leaves. Like, Timmy watched it and just died laughing. It was... it's an amazing clip. It's an amazing clip. Doc's just like, who's making these maps? It's just a dead end. It's just you just go back behind this building and there's nowhere to go. And he's built maps before, so he knows what he's talking about. Some of those maps are pretty poorly designed, but you know, in dungeons you're going to have dead ends. You're going to have false trails. I don't think that's not a bad thing. I think that's going to be a common thing in games like that. That'll probably be a common thing in the Diablo 4 dungeons because, you know, there's like 150 of them and they're all going to be procedurally generated. Outriders devs jumped ship and haven't said anything about future updates. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I would imagine that they are wanting to build another game and take everything they learned. Look at all the things they did with Outriders Endgame. It wouldn't surprise me at all if they're going to try to take what they've learned and apply it to a new game. We've talked about this before. We've talked about looter shooters and why they're so difficult to build and make them to where people will keep playing them. Good morning, Kill You. Good to see you. See, I don't necessarily think that the looter shooter genre has fully landed. I don't think it has. I really, really don't. I've continued to say that I think the next great looter shooter, somebody is building it right now. I don't think we've played the Paragon or the Archetype. We haven't. We've played really, really poor attempts in Anthem and Division 1. Most of Division 1's life cycle was a very poor attempt at a looter, right? And then Destiny is a very, very unique game in that it survived a lot of mediocrity and problems and bad choices, very bad choices. So they're almost anomalous in their survival. And even what they're doing now is somewhat formulaic and predictable. You're not necessarily having procedurally generated, fresh, giant world MMO experiences. You're having contained mission strike-oriented experiences. Whether you're playing a strike, a nightfall, or a raid, they're all very much structured the same. Even their dungeons, they follow a formula, right? And that formula works. So that formula doesn't need to be reinvented. But another game I think could come along and actually build an MMO looter shooter. Right? I don't know if there is an MMO looter shooter presently right now that has pulled off what I think could be pulled off, which is true longevity, true elasticity, and a game that you really want to invest in, play, and continue to play over and over again. Nar Waffle hit a 7-month milestone. Been a great 7 months. Looking forward to more. Thank you so much. If you guys have never done a membership on YouTube, if you decide to do one here and you click join, make sure you pick the $6 full membership. The $5 base membership is designed for gifted members. If anybody decides to gift some members, all of those people will be able to upgrade for $1 to a full membership. It's a great way to get people in the door, give them almost a discount, or just a sampling of everything that we do here. Our creative teams are currently working on several exciting AAA projects with the top publishers in the industry. Project Gemini with Square Enix and Project Dagger. Oh, that's what People Can Fly is doing. Back about 3 years ago, I was very worried companies would drop the looter-shooter genre altogether due to how disastrous so many launches have been. Yo, what's good, Spartan? You know what's funny? That could have happened, Arch Enigma. That 100% could have happened where they would have just, people would have like, it's just not possible, it's too difficult, it's not a genre we want to make. And I think what has happened is because all those games have failed, I think a lot of publishers and developers are saying, look, man, nobody's done it yet. Nobody's done it yet. We could be the company that does it. We could be the company that figures it out. So if that's the case, again, every company knows that MMO and live service is a huge moneymaker, right? Everybody knows that. I also think what's happening is developers and publishers are seeing that investing billions in a game that launches and that's it, that doesn't work for every title. Sure, it can work for God of War. Sure, it can work for, Callisto Protocol. It can work for games like that, but that doesn't work for every game. It doesn't. Because the minute you start investing in building a system with elasticity, building a system with like RPG scope and growth and loot and a loot table and a build system, you are already stepping into a landscape that is either going to be self-contained or not, right? Because I actually disagree with what Eugene is saying. There was a time where I would have agreed with him, but I don't agree with him any longer. Stop making them live service first. You have to transition from healthy game to live service. I completely disagree. I think if your game is going to transition to live service and MMO, it has to be built from the ground up with that longevity in mind. The scalability of an ongoing game must be baked into the crust. It must be built into the foundation or it won't work. It's one of the reasons it took Destiny 7 years to get to a formula, because the foundation of Destiny was not an ongoing live service game. It was a linear, campaign-driven game that they busted apart and broke into pieces. And the same could be said for numerous other games that have tried. The foundation laid in Anthem did not allow that game to transition to a live service. Name one that wasn't a BR that came out at the beginning and has been successful. Yes, and what's funny is I think you're looking through the wrong end of the telescope. You're saying, well, nobody's come out as a live service game and pulled it off. Yeah, because most of the games that have tried, they haven't built a foundation for it. They've taken a game and tried to morph it into live service. That's what happened with Anthem. Look at Destiny 1 as a test case. Destiny 1 was not built to be a live service game, and most of Destiny's 1 life cycle sucked and was terrible and was highly criticized. That foundation was still well in place when Destiny 2 launched. And look how long it took Destiny 2 to get to a functioning live service game. Why? Because it's built on a foundation that was never intended to be an ongoing live service looter shooter. Look at Diablo 3. Look at the Diablo 3. Look how long it took for Diablo 3 to pull it off and how they do it. They had to build like a side game. They didn't take the foundation of Diablo 3 and come up with the seasonal character rift system. That's like basically another game. Diablo 3 seasonal character grind is essentially a game within a game. That's not what Diablo 3 was ever built for. So That's the issue. Is like you're looking through one end of the telescope, I'm looking through the other end of the telescope. I'm saying, no. If you're going to build an ongoing live service game with loot tables and build options, and you want this thing to go the distance, it must be built from moment one with that in mind. Every system, every skill point, every piece of the loot table has to be attached to something that is so expandable and so large that I could play it 8 years from now. And if you don't build the game with that in mind, you will always deal with the, we just hit a ceiling. We can't go beyond this. World's not big enough. Loot table's not big enough. Scalability of the skill tree's not big enough. We didn't do this right. You're going to have constant tied together shoelaces every corner you turn. JW with a 22-month membership. It's been a while. Guest time flies. You're having fun. Also wishing you the best, brother. Keep up the great work. Thank you, JW. Does no one remember the year-long content drought in D1? Right. All those games had healthy player bases before they tried live service. Yeah, but the thing is, though, is actually, no. Wait, all of those games? Wait, what games are you referring to? Because Diablo 3 did not have a healthy player base before transitioning to live service. Diablo 3 literally was so unhealthy that the follow-up content that they had planned for Reaper of Souls got canceled. That's how unhealthy that game was. Destiny 1 had an extremely unhealthy player base. They've been very candid about the fact that, like, people got to a certain level and they had a massive drop-off. Borderlands 1 had a similar problem. If people couldn't get past the 45 minutes, they did not play ever again. People that did get beyond the first 45 minutes put in an exponential amount of more time. But most of these games, Diablo, Destiny, and GTA, no. Saying that Diablo and Destiny had healthy player bases is woefully inaccurate. All had dedicated bases? No, they didn't. No, that's utterly false. Diablo there has been interviews and research into this. They literally canceled the follow-up expansion to Reaper of Souls because of how unhealthy Diablo 3 is. So that's demonstrably false from their own testimony and their own content plan. The only reason Loot 2.0 system happened was because Reaper of Souls was so successful, they capitalized on the success. Saying Destiny 1 had a healthy player base? Like, no. Destiny 1 did not have a healthy player base. They also have been very open and honest about the fact that they had a massive player drop-off, and there was huge content droughts in the first year, and that people were questioning whether or not the game was going to continue. I was one of the people who put Diablo 3 down a few months after launch, didn't pick it up back up until after Reaper of Souls. They shuttered an entire expansion because Diablo 3's player base was so unhealthy. So, again, even if those games had healthy player bases and they suddenly decided to do live service, like even if we say your premise is 100% true, I don't think that then therefore means the only way to successfully do live service is build a solid ground first and then do it later. I think that's so narrow. That feels like a false dichotomy. Well, that's how all these games did it, so that's the only way to do it. That doesn't sound like you have any confidence in tech innovation or game building. It's like, well, the only way to do it is to do it what? The way that Destiny did it and Diablo did it? So do it the way Diablo did it. Fail miserably for a decade and then build the live service element. Do it the way that Destiny 1 did it and Destiny 2 did it. Fail miserably to innovate and evolve your game franchise to the point that people practically walk away and you have to reinvent the game 7 different times. Like, no way. That's not the way to do it. Destiny, 4 years of daily players, didn't have a dedicated base. Yeah, again, you're misrepresenting the situation to substantiate your position. Now that you can't do it with Diablo, you're going to do that. Diablo, the most popular looter in existence, didn't have a dedicated player base before transitioning. So now you're ignoring what was said. So I've posed things that are contrary to your claim, and now you're just throwing out something extra. So internally, they looked at Diablo and said that we're not going to do this other expansion. The player base is not strong enough to support it. They were basically end-of-lifing Diablo. That's how unhealthy the player base was. But you're going to say, well, it's the most popular looter in existence, so it had a dedicated player base, which is why they were able to transition to live service. And again, that's retroactive. You're going backwards and saying, well, because they had a dedicated player base, that's why they were able to pull off live service. Maybe they pulled off live service because they built a great system. And again, the great system that they built had nothing to do with the core game of Diablo 3. It's like a second game. Like the Diablo 3 Loot 2.0 system and the Diablo Rift system and seasonal character system, it isn't even remotely built on the Diablo 3 game. And the state that Destiny 2 is in right now has virtually nothing to do with how Destiny 1 launched. So again, the idea that those two games pulled it off and saying that's the format, you're basically saying, let's look at two games that basically crapped the bed, almost died, barely made it out alive. That's what all these other game companies should do. Number one, Destiny did not have a loyal base because of Destiny. They had a bunch of Halo people buy it because of the name Bungie. And then Diablo, again, how many years into its life cycle before they put things back on track? It took a long time. That's not the way forward for live service MMOs. I firmly just do not believe that we're going to use Diablo and Destiny as, oh, that's the only way to do it. So because Anthem failed and Division has never really risen to what it could be, well, that's the only way to do it. I think there's plenty of games that are right now proving that the formula can work. You just have to have enough content. And I think that's why the procedural generation and the automation is the single most interesting part of the interview with the Project LLL gameplay post that they put up. Diablo 3 was 2012. Live service gaming was not a thing back then. Well, yeah, I mean, that really wasn't even a focus back then. Yo, Low Life King, thank you so much for upgrading to VIP. I need everybody to do that that's currently paying for a membership. Guys, if you haven't smashed like yet, please do so. We've got 190 people who've already hit like. Thank you so much for being one of those folks. If you haven't smashed like yet, do it quickly. Not a single game has achieved what you're saying. Warframe is live service, but they are having a big issue with veteran players leaving right now. It doesn't take away from the fact that they had the huge reservoir of people who like those franchises waiting in the wings for more. Sure, but you haven't substantiated your premise is that the way to do live service, you can't build the game as a live service from moment one. And your premise is, look at these games that stumbled their way to a formula that's working. Like, Destiny's formula is working. Diablo's formula is working. And they stumbled. It took Destiny 6 or 7 years to get there. It took them a second game launch that was also just very bad. That's how they got there. And then Diablo 3 got there. Again, not because of Diablo 3, but because of Diablo as a name. So that example in and of itself is suspect. It's like the only reason they were able to be like, hey, come check out this live service thing that we did is because the Diablo fan base was so large, in large part because of Diablo 2. So any new game has to, according to you, develop a ravenous loyal fan base first, and then they can start building live service. I believe they can do both. I believe a game can build itself from moment one to be an MMO or to be live service, and they can pull it off. I think they can. You're basically saying no one can build an MMO. No one can build a live service game. They have to build a good game first, and then if they get enough people, then they transition to MMO and live service. That's so counterproductive. Because if you're going to appeal to ongoing MMO-minded players, they need to know that from moment one. If you build a game, like let's just say Anthem somehow pulled it off and had a ravenous player base and tons of people were playing and supporting the game and spending money in the game, and then they decided to transition to live service, ongoing, kind of an MMO-style game. That could be massively destructive because your player base that rallied around it might not even be MMO-minded players. Like, Project LLL is setting out to be an open-world MMO looter shooter. And people that are looking for that aren't the same as the people that are going to go and play a game that, like, look at Outriders as an example. From moment one, they're like, it's not live service. It's going to be a self-contained game. It's going to be something that you sort of play, and then that's it. So I don't think you can say no one can build a live service game for moment one. No one can build an MMO for moment one, because you almost have to, because that target audience needs to step into the game knowing that's coming. Because the audience that steps in who might not be interested in ongoing live service or an MMO, they might not transition when the game tries to transition. It simply maintains a player base with content that isn't bad enough for fans to quit, but isn't good enough for people to get excited about 2 weeks into the season. What about WoW? Yeah, I mean, I suppose we could go back in time, Eugene, and we could point to MMOs that predate these live service games that you're talking about and say that, like, well, EverQuest launched as an MMO. World of Warcraft launched as an MMO. I mean, Final Fantasy 16 would be one that you could say I don't actually know how that game launched. Did it launch as an MMO for moment one? I know it was in bad shape, and eventually it turned everything around, and everybody's like super celebrated how much that game has changed. But did it launch? I'm not 16. Final Fantasy 14. Did Final Fantasy 14 launch as an MMO? New World has that issue, but I think they're proving that you can do it. Despite our opinions, they have turned that ship quickly. Yes. Okay. So Final Fantasy was literally going to bankrupt Square Enix. It was an MMO. Okay. So, right there. I mean, do you see why you can't say... Do you see why? You can't be like, you can't build a game as MMO live service from moment one. Well, EverQuest, World of Warcraft, and Final Fantasy 14 all entered the chat, and they're like, what do you mean? We did. MMO is a different breed. I wouldn't put the games we currently categorize as live service into the MMO world. Well, the game we're talking about, they're aiming to build an open world MMO shooter. So live service and MMO, I mean, in some respects, they're kind of interchangeable. I mean, one of the games you're using as an example refers to themselves as an action MMO. Like Destiny refers to itself as an action MMO. So MMO and live service are, at some level, they're synonymous. I've been back on New World. The game is super fun to me again. 85,000 player peak in the past 24 hours with 60,000 average player numbers in the past 30 days. I always said that New World could get things back on track. There's something special about New World. It's pleasant to be in the world. They nailed sound design. They nailed content loop. It just feels good to do things in New World. I always had confidence that that game could turn things around. And yes, Warcraft had a huge player base before WoW. EverQuest didn't. I mean, that's the point. There are really giant MMOs right now that launched as MMOs that didn't do it based on an existing player base. Warcraft was an IP before WoW. Sure, but again, that doesn't mean you need that. Like, you don't need an established player base, fan base to launch this. Do we really need to go and look at the number of massively successful MMOs out there that didn't have existing fan bases beforehand? Like, to substantiate this position, you would need to be able to find no examples of MMOs that have launched as an MMO for moment one. Yo, what's good, Rainbow? The Fresh Start Worlds and New World are really good jumping in point. It's so weird. A Fresh Start server in New World. Where did we hear that idea? Diablo Immortal MMO live service? Well, I mean, Diablo Immortal MMO live service, again, they're going to say, oh, it had an established player base. It had an established, people, a bunch of people behind it. Yeah, Lost Ark was a brand new MMO. It's been massively successful. RuneScape is a very successful MMO. Did it have an established player base beforehand? Now, again, if you're talking purely live service, right? If you're talking purely live service, like what Anthem tried to do, what I think Outriders maybe could have done, right? I actually think that MMOs and live service are virtually interchangeable at this point. They are. Because if you're going to build a game, not always, that's why I say they're virtually interchangeable. When you're talking about a loot-based game being live service, you're basically talking about an MMO. If you guys are just tuning in, we've been discussing Project LLL gameplay. It looks really, really impressive, and we have been sort of debating... wait, that's the wrong ring color. Sorry, I was doing reaction content for my other channel. And, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I have to be on the group. You have to be on the group. So this here is the gameplay that we are discussing. If you guys haven't seen it yet, make sure and hit like button if you're enjoying the content. Subscribe so you can talk in my chat. It also looks like they're going to give you the option to do first person if you want. They give you that option. There are less successful MMOs than there are failed MMOs. So you're saying there's not as many successful as there are failed. Right. I mean, basically what set us down this path was don't make the game to be live service from moment one. Don't make the game to be live service from moment one. You got to build a game first and get a big player base first. And I'm like, how do you do that if it's not live service? What the frick kind of a game are you building that is going to garner a player base? The presumption that you can build a player base with non-live service, I think, is foolhardy, because if it's not live service, you don't grow a player base. Do you know what you do? You just deliver a game. You just deliver a game. And how are you going to get a player base to rally around a game if there's nothing ongoing about it, if it's a one-and-done game? Like, imagine if The Division had no plans, had literally zero plans of ongoing. They were like, yeah, no, it's just a campaign. You take over the city and you push back the bad guys. How do you grow a player base around that? How? There's got to be something more than just playing through the game one time. Oh, well, you could do a New Game Plus and World Tiers. Congratulations, you just established that it should be live service from moment one. Like, do you see what I'm saying? I don't know how you grow a player base with a non-ongoing game. What does Horizon Forbidden West, does it have a vibrant player base right now? Does it have a bunch of people playing it? So that they suddenly said, hey guys, Horizon Forbidden West is going to feature an online MMO live service update starting in 2023. Can't wait to see you there. Now, because they've already launched a game and because they've already launched a second successful game, there would probably be a lot of people that would check it out. But again, the player base that has enjoyed Horizon Forbidden West might reject the idea because they're like, that's not why I got into Horizon Forbidden West. I wanted a great action-adventure game. I didn't want an MMO. Look at what happens every time I tell people that I believe Assassin's Creed Valhalla is going to impact the market, and you're going to see way more action-adventure MMOs. Like, I think Ghost of Tsushima tested the grounds with the Legend systems and the loot systems within Legends, and I think that you're going to see, and now we're hearing about funny enough, we're hearing about a Horizon MMO. Right? And guess what happens every time I've said that? People are like, I don't want that. I don't want that. I just want a good action-adventure game. So, like, I don't know how you're supposed to grow a player base if from moment one you've established your game as a self-contained game. Do you see where my pushback's coming from? Live service immediately pushes people away. Good. Because if that's not the game they're looking for, you don't want them in the player funnel. You want people in the player funnel who are looking for live service, who are looking for ongoing. They're going to provide feedback. Their player behavior is going to be player behavior that's valuable to you. Someone that's like, bro, I don't want live service. I want to play the game one time and put it down. You don't want those people buying your game from moment one. That's not how you grow a live service MMO player base. Those people would be terrible customers. That's what I'm saying. You, from moment one, you have to establish we are building a live service ongoing game. Whether or not you classify it as an MMO or just an ongoing live service game doesn't matter. If you don't establish that from moment one, what's going to happen is you're going to fill the funnel with players that may not be interested in playing the game for more than a couple of weeks. And that's not how you build the player base that's going to support the live service game. Like, you need to fill the funnel with people like me. You want a bunch of people like me in the funnel. Casual players who are looking for something that they can continue to play over time, not something they're going to play one time. Because when I approach Horizon Forbidden West or when I approach God of War, my mindset is completely and utterly different than if you tell me, oh, we're building a live service game. Look at how I approached Anthem. Look at how I approached The Division 2. I approached them with expectations and desires, and I approached them with player habits that were vastly different than the way that I played through Horizon Forbidden West. The game footage we're watching, game looks sick, like a proper action game, except the enemies are as dumb as koala bears. Well, usually in a vertical slice combat system, the enemies are always toned down, typically. Hope it's multiplayer, not just single player. They're setting their sights on the game that you're looking at right now, Project LLL. They're setting their sights on this game being an open world MMO shooter. So that means you would be playing with other people. Ghost of Tsushima did a nice update that was a great addition to the game. I just don't think it's as narrow. I think, yes, you could do it the way that Eugene is saying. You could establish a really good game first and then do live service after the fact. Sadly, the games that have successfully done that, Destiny and Diablo, it took them almost a decade, each of them close to a decade, to get it right. I think it took Diablo over a decade, or close to a decade, and it took Destiny about 7 years to get it right. So, or get it right, meaning it took them that long to get to a formula that works, okay? So saying that, like, oh, that's the way to do it, that even the people that have done it in your example, it didn't go that well for them. You're basically telling a company that, am I the only one? Am I the only one that sees this dash, that dash forward is like right out of Titanfall? To dumb this gameplay down, it looks like arcadey Division. No, I don't agree with that because I would say more action-oriented Division. I always wanted the Division to be more action-oriented, more tech, more abilities, as opposed to just always shooting, right? I thought there should be more of a technical focus, more of a technology focus in the Division. I always thought that. You can't have a single-player MMO. It literally has multiplayer in the name. People are conflating MMO with RPG. Those aren't the same things. That's part of the point, is it's really difficult. Right, and my contention, my pushback on what you were saying, Eugene, is this. You need to fill the funnel with people that are looking for MMO. They are looking for live service. You need those people. What you don't want is a funnel full of people that aren't looking for that. If you have people that are not looking for MMO, they are not looking for live service, that's a bunch of junk data. Think about it like this. Let's actually use Destiny as an example. One of the reasons that Destiny 2 launched in the state that it launched in is, I think, partly related to the fact that the first game had a ton of people in the funnel that were not looking for a grindy, ongoing live service game. And what did that do? It made Destiny 2's launch a completely diluted, smoothed over casualified experience. Why? I think it's because you had a bunch of junk data. You had a bunch of people in the player funnel who played so insanely casually and provided such casual feedback, it honestly hurt the game. It hurt the feedback. It hurt the decisions that they made about Destiny 2. So if you fill your funnel with a bunch of people that are not looking for live service, they're going to play your game in a way that's not going to provide you with great feedback. You want to know what someone like me is going to do in your game. Yeah, that guy here, he's a data point of ongoing engagement, and this is how many hours he puts in a week. 1 or 2 hours a day, maybe a big play session on the weekend. What's that guy do? Because if you can get your game to appeal to me, that was one of the things I said about New World, is I said that I felt the future of MMOs were more casual, more approachable MMOs, because a lot of the people who grew up and cut their teeth on MMOs are in my age bracket. And if you're in my age bracket, you have 1, maybe 2 jobs, maybe you're in college, maybe you've got kids, maybe you're married, you're super busy. So it's a lot harder for you to play video games the way that you might have played EverQuest, World of Warcraft, and older games that required a massive amount of time. You can't really do those all-nighters anymore. You can't really do those weekend binge sessions with the boys anymore. You're not in a position to do that. So the demographic of gamers is going to impact where games go in their structure. So then when I looked at New World, I said, I think this is the future for MMOs. Approachable mid-lane MMOs, I think, are the future because they have to be more approachable. Oh, the boy! Oh, the boy! Oh, the little chunk! Sorry. A baby was born in the family. Little baby was born in the family, and my wife came in with a picture. I totally forgot. I totally forgot that today was the day. Little chunker. Sorry. We're really excited. It's big deal. It's big deal. Not all MMO games are subscription based. Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think that's also going away. I think subscription based MMO. I think that'll be harder to. I think that'll be harder to push. Yeah, I think that'll be harder to push. Zoomers aren't really growing up on MMOs. They're growing up on Fortnite, Roblox, and COD. By the way, if you're 25 or younger, you're a Zoomer. Right. And if the average age of gamers is still 28 and up, and that demographic is looking to play MMOs, your MMO needs to be approachable, right? And that's the thing, is this is my argument. If you're going to build a game that's going to be MMO live service ongoing in its structure, then it needs to be that from moment one. Every skill tree I look at, every loot table I look at, every boss I fight, mission I go on, quest that I accept, it all needs to be structured in a way that anticipates the 12th month of me playing. If you don't build it that way, how on earth are you going to retroactively retrofit your game with elasticity and longevity? How the frick are you going to do it? So you're going to build a self-contained skill tree, and then what? You're going to build a self-contained loot table, and then what? What are you going to do? How are you going to get me to play in the 12th month? What did I always say about Destiny 2's content loop and the struggle and the problem that they were going to face? You make people focus on loot to the point that they play compulsively, and then they love their loot. How do you get them to put that beloved, sought-after loot down and seek new loot? How do you do it? Every single time I've checked Twitter recently, I blocked virtually that entire community because they're toxic and horrible. And so are their CMs. But every time I've seen a screenshot of a gun, do you know what I see? A gun that I used 3 to 4 years ago. Why? Because they built a loot table and a loot system and a perk system that's incredibly self-contained and cannot expand. The game is bootstrapped. Why? Because when it was initially built, when they initially came up with their loot tables and loot systems for Destiny 1, and then again in Destiny 2, they really constrained themselves. They didn't build a game that could go and expand and have elasticity. For goodness sakes, they've removed entire portions of the game because of that. That Destiny 2 is literally a test case in what I'm talking about. If you don't build your skill tree, loot table, world, questing system, mission system, content structure, if none of that's built around ongoing elasticity, then you will be a bootstrap, self-contained game that pretends to be a live service game. To be fair, there's tons of new weapons and they're expanded into enhanced perks, origin traits, etc. I've seen the pictures. You're talking about percentage points of difference. And one of the things we always talked about in that game was min-maxing had no purpose or no place because the combat just doesn't allow for it. The hardest content in that game typically becomes everything's really strong and takes a long time to die and everything kills you very quickly. So you have to understand, this is not me slamming that game. What I'm saying is you look at that game and you sense the guardrails. You sense the ceiling. You sense it every time you play it. Very familiar, very formulaic, very samey, right? Mission structures. Every strike, every nightfall, every dungeon, every raid is essentially structured in the same way. It's just either bigger, stronger, or harder, right? You're just moving within that. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Many games follow a content formula. That's not a slam, but you can 100% sense the limitations and the ceiling and the guardrails on that game. Why? Because it was not built from moment one to go the distance that it's gone. You know that because they've admitted that. They've literally admitted that it wasn't built for that. They've literally admitted, yeah, we didn't build the game for this. When they decided to continue on with D2 and not go to D3, what do they say? The game wasn't built for this. We've got to start removing stuff. So they're quite literally saying what I am saying. They've said it, that if you're going to build a game that's going to go 7, 8, 9, 10 years and beyond, you can't just decide to do that later. 8 years later and it's still standing on plates and throwing balls. Right, even the way that you engage with mechanics is largely something that you've done before. That is true of most games. However, the point is, if you start from moment one, look at all the problems that we had with Anthem. Let's stop talking about Destiny for, a moment, because I don't particularly like talking about that game anyway. Let's talk about Anthem. What was Anthem's fundamental problem? They tried to push structure without substance. So they took a world tier system, that structure, right? So they tried to shove that structure into a game that didn't have the substance to support it. It was almost like taking the scaffolding and structure of a skyscraper and putting it on a sandy beach. It's just too windy and there's nothing beneath it. Just going to fall down. It's just going to topple down. So Anthem did not build the game, the loot system, the loot tables, the skill trees, none. None of the things that they did in Anthem were built to last. But it had structure as if it was supposed to last, right? That's the problem. They didn't build that game from moment one to be an ongoing live service game. Do you want to know how we know that? The same reason we know that Destiny wasn't built to be an ongoing live service game. People that worked on the game spoke out. Schreier's article pointed to a litany of problems. Bad leadership, pre-production problems, planning problems. They changed the style of game like 4 different times, changed the name of the game. And if you look at the background information on Destiny, that is exactly what happened. They were not building a game that was built to last. And they decided to bust it up and say, listen, we have had, and I think they've continued to have up until probably 2 years ago, they had an internal creative dissonance at the company. They didn't know the kind of game they wanted to build. You had people pushing for the casualification and the simplification of the loot tables and the loot systems, and then you had other people pushing for deeper systems and investment and build crafting. So you had this going on, just wham in the company. It was like fracturing the game. You could feel it. You could feel it when they tried to do Armor 2.0. It was like, what on earth? This doesn't fit with the game that you've built. This level of min-maxing and investment has no place to go. It's nowhere for me to take it. There's nothing in the game that demands me do this. Oh, I can get an extra percentage point or a millisecond shaved off of this thing's... Who cares? There was no content in the game that demanded it. And then when they tried to create content that demanded it, it was largely rejected and not enjoyed. The whatever they call the Grandmaster Nightfalls. Those were one of the earliest pieces of content that showed the limitations of that game. Why? You're taking formulaic strikes and enemies and targeting systems and aggro systems, and you're trying to suddenly make it all really strong, and it doesn't work. It doesn't translate into good content. It doesn't translate into something that's dynamic, emergent, or fresh. It's extremely deducible as a formulaic apply Formula X to win. So if you start from ground one and you say from moment one, the loot table, every weapon that we create, every perk we create, every stat attached to weapon types, perk types, all of those have to be built within a system of elasticity. It's going to fundamentally change the game from moment one. Imagine suddenly trying to take, like, okay, so we know that the company making this game is also making a Horizon MMO, okay? Imagine taking the skill trees that currently exist in Horizon and suddenly putting that in a live service game. Well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? The skill tree wasn't designed for that. It wasn't designed for you to suddenly have more stats or more points, or maybe you can strengthen them all. You can, I can do a +1 on every single one of my skills now. Okay, why? Why? Are there encounters built for that? Are there enemies built for that? Are there circumstances where you're going to feel the need to do that? No? Well, why not? Because the game wasn't built for that. You always have to build things in tandem. If you're going to build something that allows player strength to go from level 1 to 1,000, you need content that demands that of the player. So there's a harmonious sort of synchronization between your power fantasy and your growth as a player, and the game is there lock in step with you. Suddenly making a character super duper strong, like if you ever like root or hack or jailbreak a game. Was that pop-in? If you ever root, hack, or jailbreak a game, no. And like, let's say you start out the beginning of Horizon Forbidden West with every skill point spent, every skill tree totally full. Well, the game wouldn't feel right. You're way too strong. That's not what that's not how the game was designed. Why? As you progress in the world of Horizon Forbidden West, you get enough XP. The XP system, the XP payout, works in tandem with the world itself. So when you go fight a boss, a mini boss, or a quest, you feel like, oh, the new abilities I have, the new damage output that I have is answering the challenges in front of me. So that's why you can't just suddenly say, oh, let's take self-contained skill trees and loot systems and have them go ongoing. I think that's one of the continued struggles for Destiny. And still to this day, I think they struggle with it. I still think they struggle with it because it's like you have self-contained skill trees that you can't expand. You can't change them, right? You can kind of augment them and change them up and have themes, but you can't have like an ever-growing sense of power. There's a difference between building a game with systems that are expandable, flexible, and can be built upon in the future, and coming in from day one of release and being like, Corey says, and yet Diablo exists for years. Yeah, but Diablo barely made it. From day one of release and being like, we're going to support this for years, seasonal content, DLC, etc., and not have any player-based foundation to do that from. Well, it's obviously a challenge, Eugene, because if you do it your way, the problem with doing it your way is nothing's developed. You're like, well, let's see if we get a player base. Okay, well, what kind of a player base are you going to get if it's not a live service game? Like, imagine marketing your game, promoting your game, launching it, and you don't tell anybody that it's ongoing live service. It's just a really great RPG that you can play with your friends. Okay, cool. How exactly is that going to translate into a ravenous player base if there's a clear end of the game? It just ends. It's done. No, nothing ongoing. No more missions to run. No more loot to chase. You're done. How does that translate into a committed player base? How? A significant portion of the people buying that game aren't going to continue playing. For frick's sake, there are people that do that with Destiny. They buy an expansion and they play the campaign and they stop playing. You can see it in the player base numbers. Even that game has people do it. Imagine it happening in a game where from moment one, you don't tell people it's an ongoing live service game and it's a one-off. You literally get to the end and you are done. You're not replaying missions. You're not getting new loot. There's nothing live service about it. It's a linear, one-time experience that obviously you'd have it set up so you could play with your friends. Where's the player base come from? How's the player base maintained and sustained? I think you have to first build a game that's capable of supporting that, work with DLCs for a bit, and then transition. Yeah, but even DLCs, see, you're essentially saying build a game with live service capability, elasticity, longevity, and try to garner a player base without telling them that's what you're doing. Just put out DLC, continue to expand on the game, but just don't tell people you're doing that. And my pushback on that is you want people to know that's what's going on because you want those players in your game. You want me in your game. Look at the way that I treated Outriders. I got to the end and I was like, it's not a live service game, so why would I grind? Why would I go grind all these expeditions? Why would I min-max? Why would I chase loot? Why? Why? There's no roadmap. There's nothing on the other side of the wall. What's the point? It's like the Truman Show. It's like I'm gonna sail my boat all the way out to the edge of the water and then I'm gonna run into a wall. Bink! Nowhere else to go. Okay? I'm done now. That's my point, is that if you don't establish that from moment one, you're literally only going to get players that are looking for that one-off experience. You're not going to get player data from me. You're not going to get ways to measure like, well, here's how this guy engaged with this content. Here's how long this person was willing to grind and get drops and continue to replay content. Here's how long this person was willing to level up and then go into harder content. Like, you don't get any of that data. I think that's the tension, is you either do it the way that is... I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's not challenging. If you try to launch a game that's MMO live service from moment one, if you do that, you're 100%, you're facing a very, very challenging formula. Why? Well, because you need tons of people to get in, buy in, and play and get committed. So now you have justification for the ongoing bandwidth, investment, and money that you're going to spend, right? Like, that's a challenge. But I think the other is equally challenging. It's just challenging in a different way. Well, we're not going to tell anybody we're going to do live service. We're not going to have anything scoped out or planned out for live service. We're only going to do that if we can get a ravenous player base, if we can get a loyal player base. If we can get that support foundation, well, then we're going to do it. How are you going to do that if it's clear the game isn't live service? Where is this committed player base coming from? I feel like Borderlands 2 had a healthy balance that allowed for some off experience as well as a grind for those that want that. In my opinion, Truman Show's a bad analogy for that, because the way I see it, the wall was the real start of Truman's life. It's only a bad analogy if you go beyond how I used it. I didn't say anything about the story of Truman Show. I was saying that's what it would feel like. Oh, I'm setting out to sail on this amazing voyage, and then dink, I run into a wall, and that's the end of it. Like, you're misusing my analogy doesn't make it a bad analogy. Your interpretation of it's bad. That's not what I was saying. I wasn't saying within the story of Truman Show. No, I was saying that's what it would ultimately feel like. You would see this great horizon of play, and then you'd set out to sail, and then boom, you'd hit a wall and be like, well, that's the end of my sailing journey. There's nowhere else to go. Borderlands was built from the ground up as a game with replay value. Well, Borderlands was built to be Diablo with guns. So they followed the Diablo 2 formula of having a playthrough 2.0, a playthrough 2.5. Ultimately, that's a linear loop. That's not an expanding loop. Does that make sense? So a linear loop is where you go from point A to point B. That's the whole game. And it's linear, and you can loop that and do it again. A linear loop is what they went for in Borderlands. It was the same format in Diablo 2. That's not the same as saying we're going to have an expanding loop. An expanding loop would be something like what you see in Destiny or The Division, where they're adding other things to your loop that you go do, and then it raises your strength, loot diversity, and power. And again, the issue with Destiny is that game was not built from the beginning to always expand itself, so you're always bumping into the ceiling. They can only make your guns so strong. Why? Because there's a limitation on what they can do there. You're always sort of getting a new gun that's a horse of a different color. It's like, well, I've had this gun before, essentially. Oh, there's these new things that you can add, and there's these enhanced perks. Marginal differences in the gun's power, reload speed, and everything else, right? There's only so much you can do. Just in the realm of a shooter in general, there's challenges. There's only so much damage a gun can dole out. There's only so many speed enhancements you can give to its reload before you've hit the ceiling of what a gun can do mechanistically in a game. So the way to expand that gun is you have to create almost like lateral movements of, it has this ability, it has this element, it has this power. And then the way to create that elasticity in the content loop is you would then have enemies that get introduced that you require, oh, I need this new weapon because it can do this new thing. Instead of it reloads faster and it does more damage, that's so binary and flat, it would be more nuanced and expanded. So you'd go into a new area of the game and be like, oh, I absolutely need these new weapon types because these new weapon types have this power, ability, this element, this damage type, etc. I'm not just making my gun reload faster and have the bullets do more damage points. Outriders has the right path. They screwed it up for other reasons. Yeah, and I think what Outriders is doing is essentially what Division 1 did. Outriders built that Trial of Tyria guitar, or whatever the frick it's called, and that's them testing endgame for another game. That's what Division 1.8 was. It was them testing endgame and elasticity for another game. Sadly, they didn't seem to apply enough of what they learned in Division 1.8, so Division 2 launched in a similar fashion of like, it just, they didn't have a good endgame. Destiny's the only game I know where my power increases even though I don't play it. Even if Outriders was a perfect game, the amount of time it would take to redo Outriders for live service after launch would not be fast enough. It would have felt stale, if not the base game anyway. That shirt 6, my dude. I'm going to order some soon. One size down. All my clothes are getting way too baggy. Yeah, if you guys like my shirt, this is a Zen Garden shirt from Into the AM. You can use intotheam.com/Lono. Or you can go to intotheam.com and use code Lono, and that supports me, gives you a discount. That is one of our t-shirt partners. We are also partnered with 80stees.com. My code over there, Lono, gives you 30% off. Their t-shirts are a little bit more pricey, so the bigger discount's nice because it's official licensed stuff. The stuff on Into the AM is more graphic tee, more streetwear oriented. More artsy, I would say. So, and they're not as high priced because it's not like official licensed like Star Wars and Marvel stuff. If you're looking for some great Christmas shirts, 80stees.com has an amazing collection. Now's a great time to order them. Whether you go to intotheam.com or 80stees.com, just use code Lono. And if you guys have never been here before, this is what we do, lively debates and discussions. If you've been enjoying it and you've pressed the like button, thank you for doing that. Anybody who hasn't pressed like yet, consider doing so. We've gotten a handful of new subscribers today, so thank you to everybody who has pushed subscribe. If you're new, nice to meet you. Glad to have you here. And we pushed out a short on each channel today, and they all basically did great. So thank you, everybody. If you see my shorts in the feed on any one of my channels, I appreciate you supporting those. I think live service faces problems on two fronts. One's the content loop. The other is maintaining the attention of an audience with an increasingly shorter attention span. One of the reasons we're having this debate is because they did an interview with the guy... what's his title? He's the project leader, okay? And he had this to say about procedural generation. He said, "We've introduced a procedural creation method to provide content that reacts appropriately to the player's situation instead of playing preset content on repeat within the open world environment." Translation. He's basically saying, instead of you going into a cave or a building or a mission and shooting the same enemies in the same way and fighting the same boss in the same way, we want things to be procedural and reacting to you so that it feels more dynamic and more emergent, so it doesn't always feel exactly the same. You'd never have the same experience twice, essentially. Beyond that, he says, we're also thinking about a tool that can reflect this procedural creation method in content production, while also researching processes that allow for content to be produced automatically. Now, the reason he's saying this is he's not coming out and saying this, but I'm going to say it for him. If you're going to do a live service ongoing MMO style game like this, especially if it's a looter shooter, the only way you will create enough content to stay ahead of the player behavior patterns is it has to be able to basically create itself. It does. It has to be able to basically create itself. We're seeing this already in Diablo 4. Everything that they learned in Diablo 3 with the rift system and the loot system, and you can see here multiple players playing together against this mech. You can see he has a shield. The guy to the right of him is going to do a shield. I've not been doing any gameplay breakdowns. So he does a shield. The guy to the left of him is doing a shield, and then the shields eventually break and disintegrate. But I think the reason they're doing the 150 dungeons in Diablo 4 and the reason that they're going to be procedurally generated is they learned from the Rift system. Hey, we can put this in the game. Fresh experiences all the time. The core game is going to feel like it's always changing. It's always going to feel fresh and new. It's not going to feel like everybody had the exact same experience playing through the campaign. The game having systems that can be used in a live service format doesn't mean it was built for live service. But I believe that's how you build a truly great live service game, Eugene. I think one of the reasons that you can continually cite games that didn't do a good job with live service is because they weren't foundationally built for it. You continue to point to them and say, see, that's what happens when you try to build a live service game from moment one. And my pushback is, no. That's what happens when you build a game and it isn't built for live service from the foundation up, and you try to ham-fist it and it doesn't work. You are trying to force something that's unnatural. How do the sizes run and into the AM? The normal t-shirts run totally fine. I get mediums and they fit exactly how mediums should fit me. If you do their all-over prints, they run a little large. The next time I get an all-over print from them, I'm going to get a small. I have lost weight as well, so it's kind of a compounding effect. But the all-over prints are even like long. I felt like I was wearing a dadgum nightgown when I put on the medium. So if you get the all-over prints, you're going to want to order a size down over there. Everything else is exactly the right size that it should be. I think it's the way that they make all-over prints. It's a different material, and they just run a little longer and larger. Live service is ongoing content. That's it. That's all it is. That's all it means. Yes, but, Eugene, there's a big difference between ongoing content that's intended to last for like a year or two. Like, let's say you're designing a game, right? Let's say you're designing a game and you know that in 2 to 3 years, you've scoped out a sequel. So the live service support only needs to last 2 or 3 years. That will have an effect on the skill trees, the loot tables, and the content itself. Why? It only needs to last 2 or 3 years. If you're building a game and you want your game to go 10 years or more and be a truly special ongoing MMO live service game, your skill trees, your loot tables, your sense of player power is going to need to be built completely differently. It needs a lot more elasticity. You need to build a foundation that has way more breadth, because if not, they're going to get into their first or second year and say, I don't feel like the game's expanding anymore. I feel like I'm kind of running in a circle. Not like as successful as Destiny has been, I think Destiny's formula is not one that other games should try to replicate. Do you want to know why? Because Destiny has a secret sauce that keeps you playing beyond the content depth and breadth. You are not playing. Most people are not continuing to play Destiny because of the content depth and the content breadth and the content evolution. Because the needle of depth, breadth, and evolution movement in Destiny, that needle's barely moved over 7 or 8 years. Barely moved. It's moved. They've increased it. They've expanded the depth and the breadth, and they've evolved it. But that needle hasn't moved much. You keep playing because it feels so freaking good to play. It's just got a secret sauce. There's something special there that you almost can't quantify. That's why other games should not try to replicate that. You will not be able to do what they did. You just won't be able to. If somebody came out right now and built an almost identical system to what they do with the seasons and the way they deliver content and the way they deliver like missions, raids, dungeons, etc., and they just did it in their own game with their own abilities and their own powers and their own loot table, you know what everybody would say? I just don't care. I just don't care. Because, you know, and you would say, oh, it's because you don't have a dedicated player base yet. It's more than that. It's more than that. I don't think you can do what they did, because so much of what they have done does not rise and fall on their content ingenuity and their depth and breadth of systems. They have something that just feels so good that people keep playing. It doesn't matter if the strikes feel similar to the last strikes that you ran. It doesn't matter if the raids and the dungeons feel familiar. Even on the first playthrough, there's a familiarity to them. That doesn't matter, because it just feels really, really good to be in the game. And trying to replicate that, I think, would be a mistake. Oh, well, build a really good, game and content loop and skill trees and systems and loot tables first, and then expand it later. Again, the problem with that is that if you don't build those systems for elasticity and expansion from moment one, they will not expand very easily. They will struggle. They built a game that people wanted to keep playing first. But it's more than that. It's more than that. Not every game can set their sights on that, Eugene. That's my point. It's like the three things to choose from when you're starting a business. You can choose to run your business on value, price, or convenience. And you can only pick two. Because if you go price and convenience, then value is going to go down. If you run on value and convenience, then price is going to go up. If you run on value and price, it's not going to be very convenient, right? Like, I'm probably messing up the three. I think the three, but essentially that's what the three are, okay? So, I don't think you can apply that idea that, well, everybody's got to build a good game first, and then you build the live service next. No, I think some games, their value and quality can be built upon the systems themselves, and people see the potential of those systems, and they keep playing because it gives them a sense of progress and power. It's easy to prove this by looking at the gamification, the battle pacification of virtually every game that's out there. If you look at mobile games, like, that's what keeps people playing, right? It doesn't need to be this special... It doesn't need to be this special experience of like, oh, it feels so good to play. As long as the systems themselves are built well, people will commit to the systems. Gameplay can be more mid-lane if the systems are built well. Mobile games prove this. A 7-year plan doesn't matter if your game isn't fun to start with. Right, but you can't create a false dichotomy like, well, if you create a 7-year plan and have really good elasticity of systems and you have really good skill trees and loot tables built, well, then the game's not going to be fun. You can do both. You can build a game that feels really fun to play and is really amazing and also has really good elasticity and loot systems. I think Anthem's a great example. Imagine if Anthem would have built itself with Diablo's loot system, Loot 2.0 and their Rift system. Imagine if Anthem would have done that. Anthem would have been amazing. Why? One of the reasons people got so mad about Anthem was because it was so enjoyable to play and there was nowhere to go. You can build an elastic game without looking 7 years into the future. I don't agree. If your general strategy is you want the game to last 10 years, you build an elastic game with those 7 years in mind. You have to. If you're looking that far, spending resources doing it, there are resources taken away from launch. Not necessarily. Nope. That's not true. You can run simulations. You can run gameplay simulations, and you can say, how long would it take a player to get to this power threshold? Okay, what if we add power on top of that later? What if we do lateral movements of power? How long would that take? What would that look like in combat? You can run simulations. You can purely mathematically simulate it and say, okay, if we want this game to last this long, let's test the idea on paper. Let's just crunch numbers. You can run simulations and number crunches to see whether or not a game could make it that far, whether or not a game could have that level of elasticity and longevity. I mean, even Destiny had, I believe his name was John Hobson. He was a behavioral brain scientist, and he basically helped them study how long people would repeat certain actions before giving up. Like, they studied that. That's one of the reasons Destiny has some secret sauce in it, is because so much of it's built on psychology and behavioral brain science. It's not just built on, like, pretty twinkling lights and loot drops. I actually think Anthem's a great example against what you're saying, Eugene. Because they built a game that was really fun, and people really enjoyed it, and people wanted more, and there wasn't any more. There was no system. There was no elasticity. There was no world tier system that made sense. There was no endgame. So what happened? Gone. Game died. So they built a game that was really, really fun and really satisfying to play. And that was it. Where's the rest of it? They had tons of people playing. They had people that wanted to keep playing. If you played Anthem purely linearly, and you just got your 4 javelins, and you played through the campaign, and you got them all the way leveled up, there was nothing after that. And built on the promise of live service. Right, but don't you see? Anthem did the thing that I'm talking about. They didn't build their game from the ground up to be elastic and to be ongoing. So the good content loop didn't matter. It felt great to play it. It was super satisfying. But because there was nothing beyond it, the game went nowhere. Now, if they would have built that game from the ground up to survive and live and had an end game, it would be an example of everything I'm talking about. If they would have spent 3 or 4 years building systems and loot tables and power and content structure around that world tier system that they built, they would be in my corner right now. I'm like, yep, there's a game that did it. Right now, they're an example of what not to do. Yeah. Great gameplay. Feels so satisfying to run around as 4 different javelins. The flying is unmatched to this day. Iron Man will probably largely borrow from that game when the Iron Man game comes out. Anthem delayed the whole roadmap because of game issues. Well, and again, that's not related to whether or not it was built for live service. That was more related to it was poorly handled in pre-production. So the game was built in 18 months instead of being built over 4 to 5 years. So what we played when we played Anthem was like an 18-month build, which is insane. Like, that's such a small amount of time. So that was why the roadmap didn't get out. You got to diagnose each of the problems, somewhat independently of each other. Like, if from moment one they knew the game they were going to build, then Anthem would have worked as a live service game. Why? Because the gameplay was satisfying and the systems would have been there to support it, and the ongoing content plan would have been there to support it. If you look at Anthem and you think, oh, it failed because they tried to build the game to be a live service from moment one, you are literally saying something that's false. That's not why the game failed. It wasn't built to be live service from moment one. That's why it failed. You have to properly diagnose what happened to Anthem. Anthem failed. Why? Because it tried to be a live service game and it wasn't built from the ground up to be a live service game. So you're looking at the wrong thing if you think, what was the causality? Well, the causality was, we want to be a live service game, but we didn't build one. We didn't build one. So the good content loop didn't save them. It wasn't like, hey, well, now that we have this great content loop and it's really satisfying to play, well, now we'll build a live service game. No, it was over. It was done. It was cooked. Promise of live service may have been there, but none of the work that had been done would make it happen. Sort of like Avengers, but they lied about having a true roadmap. Yeah, this game is called Project LLL. We are taking a look at Project LLL gameplay. This trailer came out. We read through an interview with the project lead, and we really appreciate everybody being here today. I'm always excited to talk about looter shooters because I think this is the genre and this is the game type that I understand the most. And it's why I'm debating the notion that you shouldn't build the game from the beginning to be live service. I don't agree with that. I think that's exactly what you should do. Iron Warrior just upgraded to a full membership. Thank you so much for doing that. We need all paying members to get off of base membership. There is still a ton of you down there at base membership for $5 a month. $6 a month is full. We need that dividing line between full members and gifted members. Going forward, you're going to need to upgrade if you're going to want to consume all the members-only content. And we're going to start to throw a lot of stuff out there to motivate people to become members because we're trying to foster that culture on YouTube, and we have fundamentally failed to do that. We largely are just appealing and getting members from people who were already members before. Studios seem to be using the live service tag to get around the fact that their game is pretty much a beta with community input, pushing to full release. I don't know how many games are doing that. Can you cite a handful of games that have done that? They called it live service and then launched as a beta? Like, what games did that? Anthem didn't launch as a beta. Anthem was mishandled by leadership in pre-production, and it changed game types like 3 different times. So I don't think that's a great example. I don't think that's a good example of what we're talking about. We need a dedicated emote for when people upgrade. I know. We also need a way to ask for likes that's not like annoying, because I know people are like, quit asking for likes, but it really does help the video. So we need 27 more to get to a nice like milestone. Maybe if you guys spam Lono dope, that little thumbs up emote, it'll remind people, you know? Live service games are basically diet MMO. You have to think of it as an MMO when developing, but lower the barrier to entry. The content volume has to be similar, though. Like, everything we know about game development, I don't think this notion that you can launch a game and not plan to do live service from moment one, but build systems that could be expanded upon if you get a dedicated player base, right? Like, and then you just, suddenly start spinning up content? Do you have any idea how backwards that is? Imagine doing that. You launch your game. We're not going to scope out live service roadmap. We're not going to scope out live service projects and have teams doing parallel development so that we have content ready to go. We're not going to do that. We're going to build a really good base game, and if the game is super successful and has a good player base, then we're going to start building the live service content. Are you going to tell people it's going to be a live service game? No, we're not going to tell them that. Okay, so are you even going to attract live service type players? Well, no, probably not. Okay, well then how are you going to establish a live service player base to support it? The gameplay will be really good. Okay, well then what's the timeline turnaround on any of the content you're going to be adding for the live service version of the game? Well, we're not building any of it yet, so 2 to 3 years. So, do you see what I'm saying? That is fraught with so many problems. Number one, your timeline of actually actioning, like taking the action of executing live service content, would be so far away from launch that everyone would be like, why is it taking this long? And what are you gonna do? You're gonna say, what, surprise, like all of a sudden we're a live service game like 2 years later? Who's playing at that point? If you didn't market it as a live service and you didn't content trickle like a live service to keep people playing, who's playing at that point? Who's gonna support it? So you're kicking the content expansion down the road way farther. You're kicking your live service content addition way down the road, years down the road. And beyond that, you're also hoping that by the time that content shows up, there's still people playing the game. Why would they still be playing? I think the pushback for live service is, how do you build a game that feels like a complete experience and still has the elasticity to keep players for 10 years? This is why MMOs fail. This is a conundrum that I believe can be solved. Right? I believe they can solve it. This reminds me of Titanfall mixed with Anthem. Yeah, there's definitely some Titanfall influence. I think what some people are kind of putting forward right now is defeatist. It's like you're jumping to a conclusion. It's like, well, a bunch of people have tried and failed, so it's not possible. You can't launch a game that wants to be an ongoing live service MMO from moment one. Can't do it. Why? Well, because a bunch of people have tried and failed, and the few people that have done it successfully stumbled their way for close to a decade before they got a formula that worked. Well, what do you mean? So no one can figure this out? No one can nail the formula? No one can come up with technology that allows them to create the expansion and the pipelines for production that'll work? No one can figure out a game's scalability so that you play it in the first month and you feel like this is an amazing game that I would like to continue playing? That's what I see too, not willing to give anyone a chance. Wild. That's what I mean. Where's the faith? Like, if you would have gone back in time to when we were originally playing like open world games, like the earliest versions of open world games and shooters, and you thought, yeah, there's no way they'll ever be able to create games that are giant and, you know, true to life and photorealistic and allowing players to, you know, simultaneously play together and chat together, like you'd look foolish now, right? Because technology obviously allowed them to do things that thought, you know, we at one point in time probably thought never were possible. Just three-dimensional games were mind-blowing. Remember the first time I saw Mario 64. You know, we will take a look around, and like Mario jumped up and spun around, and I was like, what in the world is that? AC Valhalla is still going strong. Right, like imagine someone looking at AC Valhalla and saying, we're going to do that with our action-adventure game. We're going to build this big giant world, this big giant map. The skill tree, the loot table, and the content is going to be built with elasticity and longevity in mind. Why would you not try to figure this out? Yeah, look at what Sony's doing. That amazing point, Game Break. Eugene, you love Sony. Is Sony going the wrong way? They have their sights set on building, 10 live service games? Are all those games going to fail because they're building them to be live service games from moment one? Is our precious Sony going the wrong way? Because that's what they're doing. Do you think every single one of those live service games that they're promoting right now as live service games are not going to be built to be live service games from moment one? Are they not going to tell people that they're live service games from moment one? I feel like they're going to, because they literally have told people that that's their plan. We want live service games. We want ongoing live service games. That's literally why they bought Bungie. So are all those games destined to fail then? Are all those Sony games that Bungie is going to help Sony make with their live service, their Center for Live Service or whatever it's called, are all those games gonna run aground? Because we know they're going to be live service from moment one, and they're going to be built to be live service from moment one? I disagree that the problem can be solved. I think that doing one starts to undo the other. It's impossible to predict with any sort of certainty what kind of content loop will keep. I don't agree with that. I think you can predict with some level of certainty what content loop will keep, because there are games proving it right now. Destiny's proving it. Diablo 3 is proving it. No Man's Sky is proving it. Path of Exile's proving it. There are games proving what content loops can work. You can copy the logistics and change the substance and the content. I'm genuinely curious. I'm genuinely curious what you guys think. If you think a game cannot say, we're going to be live service from moment one, and they build to be live service from moment one, then Sony is making a gigantic error, because they're investing a lot of time, money, and energy, and they literally acquired Bungie so they could crank out a ton of live service games. Those games will be promoted as such. You will know day one when you boot it up, you're booting up a live service game. Is that they shouldn't do that. According to some of the argumentation I've seen today, Sony's making a giant mistake by doing that. Those games are destined to fail. You're not supposed to build a game to be live service from moment one. You're supposed to build a good game and then transition it to live service later. Which I've attempted to show how that would be incredibly difficult and faulty. From production time of that content would be so long that it would take too long to transition to live service. And how do you build a player base around a game that is not from moment one? It's not live service. Where's this community coming from? Look at all those games that copy the formulas and are largely unsuccessful. I'm not sure what you're talking about. No Man's Sky copied the Diablo 3 formula with expeditions, and it has been largely successful for them. Path of Exile mimicked other live service structures, and it's been very successful for them. Final Fantasy XIV made structures and pivots largely impacted by what other MMOs and other live service games have done, and look at the success of the Endwalker stuff. Undoubtedly, New World is making changes to their loot tables and systems based on player behavior, player response, but also some of the foundational decisions they made with New World were based on other MMOs. Like, there are plenty of games figuring this out. Just because you can find games that are struggling or games that didn't pull it off, to then conclude, yeah, nobody can figure this out. It's just such a weird way to look at video games and technology. It's just such a... I honestly think it's just a weird outlook. All the advancements we're seeing, all these people that tell me that, like, technology's untapped, they still haven't figured out how to squeeze everything out of the PS5s, we still haven't seen what people are able to do. Oh man, Unreal 5, these engines, that engines, all these tech updates, all these amazing things we're going to do with technology, but game companies can't figure out how to build a live service or an MMO from ground one. They can't figure out how to do it. Sony seems to think they can. They have plans to do a bunch of live service games. Sony looked at the market, Sony bought Bungie, and Sony said, we're going to launch X number of live service games over the next 5 years. So apparently they shouldn't be doing that. Those games are all destined to fail, according to the defeatism in my chat today. This discussion is why I was hoping you were going to react to the Ackman video I posted on his thoughts on live service. I want to react to Actman, but after everything that happened, I was kind of keeping distance from reacting to his content because there was just a lot going on with him and with YouTube and drama, and I didn't want to have any of my channels or the Reforge brand like attached to him. Like I don't have any like or dislike for him. I'm not familiar with him. It's just he was attached to a bunch of stuff that I don't want to be attached to. So that's why I didn't react to his video. I have a reaction video on Starfield that'll hit sometime next week, I believe. Juicehead had a really good video that I reacted to. Most people call a game a failure just because they didn't like it, and that's not how it works. That's landing today? Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. I wasn't sure. We had a handful of reaction videos. I don't care when it lands. That's fine if it lands now. Starfield's in the headlines right now, so it probably makes sense to do it now. Like Phil Spencer kind of put Starfield back in the headlines, so it probably makes sense to run it today. I didn't have a strong opinion about when we ran any of them. I just record them and leave that to you. I got my second full set of the Lego stuff done. So we're hoping to have that done before December 1st because we want to be able to do the daily Lego advent calendar while we're in December. Could we get 8 more likes on the video? You guys are so awesome. If you've already pressed like, you're cooler than all the people that haven't yet. We're going to make it a competition. The biggest issue with live service is that a lot of times the games are released broken, buggy, and unfinished. If you can remedy those issues and then provide live service, it definitely could be successful. So this is why I use Anthem as a test case, Rob. If you look at Anthem and you say, well, Anthem launched buggy, broken, and unfinished because they wanted to be live service, that is fundamentally incorrect. That's not why Anthem launched broken, buggy, and unfinished. It launched in that state because it was mishandled in pre-production. They changed the genre of the game numerous times, and it was a game that should have been in production and cooking for 4 to 5 years, and they built it in 18 months. None of that has anything to do with live service. Anybody who points to Anthem as an example of like, there's another game that tried to do live service and failed and came out half-baked, and they blame it on live service, that person is ignorant to the realities around Anthem, or they know about them, and they're just grinding an anti-live service axe. It's dishonest to look at Anthem and say, Anthem failed because it tried to do live service. No. That is demonstrably and provably false. That is not why Anthem failed. If Anthem would have cooked for 4 to 5 years as a live service game, it would have been amazing. It would have been amazing. They could have stood on the shoulders of giants. They could have stood on the shoulders of Destiny. They could have stood on the shoulders of Diablo and been like, we applied everything we learned from those games and we did it in our own way. And instead, 18 months. It cooked for 18 months. Anthem had no endgame and bad loot. It had no endgame and bad loot because they built the game in 18 months instead of 4 to 5 years. Imagine playing a game that was built over 18 months and that's what you blame it on. Well, they tried to do live service. That's why the game failed. No, it failed because they built the thing in a year and a half. I think the Sony or future live service models will be a 10-year strategy. I think that plan is probably half that time and likely going to be built like the transition from D1 to D2. I mean, there's no way to know if you're right. That's pure speculation based on like virtually nothing. They've said nothing other than that they want to build a bunch of live service games and they're going to use Bungie to help with it. Anthem took a game that was never made for live service and shoved it in. Right, which proves... you could look at either side of that coin. On one side of the coin, it proves what I'm saying. If they would have spent 4 to 5 years building a live service game, it would have been amazing. Instead, it was a half-baked game with an 18-month build cycle, so it was buggy and glitchy and terrible, and they tried to force in all this ongoing live service stuff. It was destined to fail, and it had nothing to do with, oh, you tried to do live service. That's not why it failed. That's not. And Eugene, I don't know if you were here, I asked you, if building a game from the beginning to be live service is a destined failure, then Sony is destined to fail with their efforts with live service because they have said, we are going to build so many live service games in such a certain amount of time, and Bungie's going to establish this live service center with us, and they're going to help us do it. So they are right now scoping out and building games that are built to be live service from moment one. Are those games destined to fail? Is Sony making an error? According to some of your argumentation today, I would have to conclude that then Sony's making a mistake. These games won't do well. They can't be built for live service from moment one. All their games have player bases. So the live service games they're building are not all going to be built on existing player bases. I mean, some will probably, but not all. Live service doesn't just mean shooter. A pet store sim could be live service with microtransactions as well. Sony and Bungie could be working on anything. If a game is planned well in advance for live service, it can be successful. That's what I'm saying. Like, to look at Anthem and look at all of the things they started to try to do just after like a year of launching. Most of it was quite literally ripped from other games. It was ripped from other games. So again, if they would have spent 4 to 5 years saying, we're going to build this game and we're going to use loot system and ideas from Diablo 3 and Destiny, and we're going to have an ongoing world tier system that is largely influenced by Diablo, and if they spent 4 to 5 years building that game would have been fantastic. Like, they didn't need an existing player base. Look at the immediate popularity of Anthem. Look at the immediate popularity and demand of Anthem. Was that because it had a ravenous established player base? No. It's because people want a game like that. They want an ongoing looter-shooter live service game. Why do you think... To say that Anthem failed because they promised live service and didn't deliver, but then in the next breath be like, well, you can only pull off live service if you have an established fan base or an established game first. What? Well, then why did everybody boot up the game and want it to be live service, complain? I mean, the game went viral for not having an end game. Why did it have so many people playing it? Why did it have so many people hoping that it would be live service? Why? It didn't have an established player base. It didn't. The reason Sony is setting their sights on live service, the reason this company is setting their sights on an MMO looter that's ongoing, open world, is because people want it. That's what they want. The reason, it was BioWare. That's why Anthem was so popular. To continually look at every single example and to attribute it to something external from the game itself, I just think is very convenient. It's just convenient that, like, every time I make a point, oh, it's because of the developer. Oh, I thought it was because of the games and the established fan bases. Now it's because of the developer. Like, and again, if it was all on BioWare, that's why people play the game so excitedly. But why were people so disappointed in the fact that it wasn't a good live service game? Because people want that. There is demand for it. The outcry against Anthem isn't because you had this ravenous BioWare fan base. The outcry was because people want that game. They want an ongoing looter shooter. That's what they want. External, they took a single player game and at the end tried to the live service. No, I'm saying that the popularity and the intrigue and the interest and the subsequent massive amount of criticism that Anthem received was not because of this external BioWare fandom. It was because people want a game like that. Like, a lot of the BioWare fans looked at Anthem and weren't even interested from moment one because it wasn't some story-driven RPG. It was a live service. I had a lot of people telling me, they're like, I have no interest in Anthem. I want BioWare to tell amazing stories. I don't want some live service game. I don't want some looter. There were a lot of people that didn't even want to play Anthem because they didn't want a BioWare looter. A lot of the BioWare fan base turned their nose up to Anthem before it even hit the shelves because that's not what BioWare is known for. The point is, the reason you literally have Sony buying Bungie, setting up a live service center, and then you have all these other games continuing to come out to try to pull it off, and you're like, these games are all destined to fail if they try to do it from moment one. No, I don't think so. I don't think there has been a single game that has come out that was built from the ground up to be an ongoing live service or an ongoing MMO. They've all been half-baked because they tried to do too much in pre-production. Anthem was built in 18 months. Do you want to know why New World struggled? I'll tell you why New World struggled. They changed the fundamental identity of the game during development. Another reason to say that New World didn't struggle because, oh, they came out of the gate and tried to do an MMO, and you can't do that. You got to build a game and establish a fan base first and then transition to MMO. No, you need to establish the game as an MMO from the very beginning because you want fans of MMOs to play it and test it and pressure it to see where the weak points are so that you can research and expand the game beyond that, because then you know what the player engagement's going to look like. The reason that New World struggled and is now on an upward swing is because they've refocused the identity of the game. They fundamentally changed the identity of New World, like, during development. It was going to be an always PvP game. And I've always told people that just won't work. I think Ashes of Creation is going to run into that. I think it is. The First Descendant debuts PlayStation 5 demo at G-Star. Oh, they're letting people play it on a PlayStation 5 at an event. Event G-Star, Thursday, November the 17th to Sunday, November the 20th. So it looks like we're going to see we might see some playable demo stuff from First Descendant going forward. That game didn't fare very well with the people that did get to play it up to now, unfortunately. Exactly, says Solemn. If you want a game to be a live service, then the skeleton in the base needs to be built with that in mind. That's exactly what we've been debating this morning. It's been a good debate. It's been a fun debate. It's been a fun back and forth. I think all these Sony games that they're building, they need to be built from moment one to be live service. From moment one. The loot tables, the structures, the systems, the power, all the things that you're going to try to do, all of it needs to be built for live service from moment one. It simply must. Apex is great live service. Genshin Impact, all new IPs, Sea of Thieves. Well, I don't know if you can count Sea of Thieves. We don't have any indication that that player base is very healthy. And to his credit, Eugene did say, without naming BRs, can you name a live service game that launched as a live service game and pull it off from moment one? I think once you leave the West, you can find plenty of games that launched as ongoing live services or as MMOs from moment one and have been successful. You just have to not look at Western gaming. Once you look at like mobile gaming and Asian gaming markets, you can see that you can launch as an ongoing live service or an MMO from moment one and be very successful. Some of the most popular games in the world literally launched as ongoing games from moment one, MMOs. Lost Ark is an example of that. I would use Lost Ark as an example of an MMO that launched as an MMO from moment one. There's mobile MMOs that launched and they're immediately, you know, they're designed from moment one to be ongoing. So I don't think anybody's figured it out yet, but I also don't think anybody's done it yet. I don't think anybody's done it yet. Anthem did not build a game from the ground up to be live service. Like, think about it. You're almost proving me right by admitting that Anthem tried to shove live service into a game that wasn't built for it. Yeah, you just proved my point. I've been saying all morning that you can't add live service later. You have to have a game built from the ground up to be live service, which the contention has continued to be, no, build a great game first, then add live service later. Well, Anthem tried to do that, and they failed, because why? The game wasn't built for live service, which is what I've been saying. If it's not built for live service, then you can't just retroactively add live service later. Foundation of a good game has to be there. All the loot systems, the elasticity, etc. that are in a successful live service game are just good foundation that would work in non-live games. Not necessarily, because again, if you look at the skill trees and the power fantasy in Ghost of Tsushima, none of that is built for me to play that game for 7 months. It just isn't. The loot system in Ghost of Tsushima and the power and the skills and all the things I can invest in, none of that is built or paced or structured for me to play the game for 7 months. It isn't. Then look at the loot system in Ghost of Tsushima Legends. It's this entirely new extra thing that is not even remotely tied to the main game. So no, it's not true. If they suddenly tried to make Ghost of Tsushima live service, it wouldn't work. Ghost of Tsushima is a beautifully built, amazing system. It's got amazing structure for power fantasy and a good skill system. And if you suddenly try to make it live service, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't translate. There are plenty of action-adventure games right now that have a giant map and a giant world that you could turn into live service, but the internal loot tables and the internal skill tree systems wouldn't work. And they're great. So a really, really good and well-built loot table and a really, really well-built skill system doesn't translate to live service automatically. That is so presumptuous to think that. You're just going to take an existing skill tree in an action-adventure game like Horizon Zero Dawn or Tsushima and be like, well, they built a great game, they built a great loot table, and they built a great skill tree system. That should translate into live service. What the frick are you talking about? None of that was designed to go beyond one playthrough. None of it was designed, maybe a New Game Plus, maybe. But even then, that's not live service. That's like a 2.0 experience, like you can experience in Diablo 2 or Borderlands 2. Let's take The Division, for example. Perfect example of a live service from the ground up that went bad as time went on. No, The Division 1 arguably got better as time went on. Division 1.8 was hailed as the best version of The Division. It got better as time went on. Division wasn't live service from moment one. Are you serious, Clark? Yes, it was. Division 1 was live service from moment one. What are you talking about? The Dark Zone systems, the planned raids, and the challenge content, and the world tier system? Are you kidding me? Division 1 was live service from moment one. What are you talking about? It was not some self-contained game that became live service later. It was built for it from the very beginning. literally, the World Tier wasn't at launch. Well, the World Tier wasn't at launch, but I'm sorry, the challenge system. You could go and replay all the missions at a challenge level to get higher tier gear. They had an endgame built in right away to prepare for raids. That's live service. What are you talking about? It was marketed as an ongoing live service game. It was compared to Destiny. Division 1 from moment 1 was live service. It didn't have world tiers. Raids? What? Yes! You don't remember that? What? Eugene, there was a raid in Division 1. It launched. Everybody did all these challenges. Everybody did all these challenges and prepared, and it wasn't called a raid. What was it called? No. Okay, so it wasn't called a raid. No. There was something that launched after the fact, and you had to prepare for it by running all of the missions in challenge mode to get better loot. They didn't call it a raid, but it was basically a raid. They literally structured Division 1 almost identically to how Destiny 1 worked. Get the frick out of here. It was live service from moment 1. It was called an excursion. Is that what it was called? Yeah, that was basically their raid. It had a specific launch date that was like a month after release, and you prepared for it by running challenge mode. D1 at that point wasn't live service? At what point do you think Destiny 1 became live service? So it only became live service once they moved away from planned DLC format? Because planned DLC format, ongoing format, do you remember that the marketing for DLC models aren't live service? Okay, well, let me drop an interview on you that proves what you're saying is wrong. Before Destiny 1 even came out, they said they envisioned it being a game you would play for 10 years. That's live service. Forsaken is when it became live service. This is one of those times where you've come up with your own definition of when Destiny 1 became live service. Destiny 1 was live service from moment 1. It was designed for you to play it week after week. There were updates, there were events, there was DLC. It was live service from moment 1. They staggered their raid. That's just like what MMOs do. Destiny 1 literally structured themselves like a light MMO, but it wasn't live service from moment 1. They literally staggered their raid. They had DLCs. They had events. They had an ongoing experience. New loot was added. New things to go do. That's live service. Nine years ago, online open world RPG. Yeah, that's how they literally the end of the announcement for Division 1 trailer. Yeah, let me lay this one on you. Division 1 and Destiny 1 were live service from moment 1. They were 100% live service from moment 1. This is the end of the trailer for the Division 1. This is the end of the trailer from 9 years ago. Online open world RPG. An online open world RPG is not live service under a traditional DLC model, but it wasn't a traditional DLC model. When did Destiny 1 do its first event? They did it. They did the when was the first when was the first Iron Banner? They literally had events in the game. That's live service. Just because it wasn't seasonal doesn't mean it's not live service. They had planned ongoing content. They had planned ongoing content, whether you call it a DLC or a season, new content, new loot, new experiences, staggered out. Then they started doing events. Like, it was live service from moment 1. They literally said, look at what they did. Look at what caused them to delay the game for a year. 2 lifetimes ago in Destiny, when we played the alpha, we were told by the devs, this is a step 1 of a 10-year plan in our live service efforts. Yeah, they literally classified the game as live service from moment 1. Maybe that term wasn't really used back then, but the fact that they pushed this game out, and then guess what? We got that wonderful article from Kotaku where people at the company said higher-ups at Bungie rejected Joseph Staten's supercut. It was a 2-hour supercut. They rejected it, broke the game apart, and delayed it for 1 year. Why? Because they wanted a game that people would continue to play ongoing. They did not want a campy, cutscene-laden, single-player experience. From the very beginning, they said, this is going to be an ongoing game. That's live service. A live service game is a type of video game that's designed to keep people engaged so they play it as long as possible. That means that instead of making one game and moving on to the next, companies create a game that can be updated for years to come. Yeah, that was Destiny 1 from moment 1. That was Division 1 from moment 1. That's what live service is. If you've come up with some super narrow version of live service, which is like, well, it's got to be seasonal format, and it's updated every 3 months, new content loops, new things to chase. No, that's one shade of the live service palette. Their development was already in gear to live service before even coming out. It wasn't like Outriders or something they put on the shelf and think about being live service. Live service means always online, constant updates, DLC, etc. Yeah, I don't think their transition away from DLC model to seasonal model is when Destiny became a live service game. I believe from moment 1, the Division 1 and Destiny 1 were live service games from the very beginning. They were designed for you to play and play and play and keep coming back month after month after month. It's why Destiny 1 was literally delayed so they could do that. Division 1 was structured so they could do that, so they could have people continuing to play. You didn't just beat Division 1, you beat Division 1, then you went and ran missions on challenge, and then they launched an excursion like a month later, and it was a disaster and it was terrible. And then they had planned content drops after that. It was a live service game from the very beginning. This rose-colored glasses idea that Destiny 1 and Division, they launched as just good games, and they did live service later. That's bull. They launched as live service games from the very beginning, and one of them is still standing. Division 2 is there, but it ain't at the level of Destiny. Destiny pulled it off, and it took them a long time. Outriders was a weird in-between. The devs said it wasn't live service, but it felt like it was, but really wasn't. Well, yeah, Outriders was clearly built to be a foundation for a potential live service game, and I believe their most recent endgame update with the trial of Tyria Guitar, it's so hard to pronounce. I believe that is their test for their next game. I think their next game is largely going to be influenced by what they learned with that trial of Tyria Guitar thing. I think that is their new structure for endgame. That's what I think. I think they're gonna say, hey, we learned great lessons from that. That's our format going forward for Endgame. So I don't think Outriders will ever be live service, but I also think that Outriders is set to be the foundation for another game that will be ongoing live service from moment 1. If you could say or spell their name of the expansion of Outriders, they'd be in a good place right now. Well, no, the end game is called like Trial of Tyria Guitar or whatever, but the update was called there was New Horizons and then something else. The actual update had a cool name. What did we covered it. We played it. Outriders. World Slayer. Right? Yeah. World Slayer. World Slayer has a great name, and then before that it was New Horizon. So, yeah, the Trial of Tyria Guitar or whatever the frick, like, that's terrible naming for the content, because I don't know how to pronounce it. But, yeah, the World Slayer was actually, I actually think the marketing and the stuff around World Slayer was actually pretty cool. Right, and see, Jason, that's ultimately the debate we've been having this morning. And that if you build a game that you think you might do live service later, but you don't want to tell anybody that it's live service, and you don't want to build the systems to be live service from moment one, but if it's successful enough, well, then you'll do live service. I just think that is such a shaded, weird view of all the successful live service games that are out right now. Destiny was live service from moment one, and they've refined the formula over 7 or 8 years. Diablo was meant to be an ongoing game. You think Diablo 3 dropped on the landscape with an auction house and planned DLC, and that wasn't live service? That's an ongoing game that's going to continue to get support, and they want people to keep playing it and spending money in it. So they refined the formula, and when they landed with Reaper of Souls, and then later the Loot 2.0 system and the Rift system and the seasonal system, that was them refining a live service game. It was a live service game from moment one. It just wasn't structured very well. So everybody's doing the same thing, and acting like the successful live service games didn't do that, I just think is disingenuous, because Anthem tried to and failed. Division 1 ultimately tried to and started to succeed, and then when they transitioned to Division 2, it ultimately failed, and Division 2's in a better place right now, but they did the same thing both times. They shot their launch in the foot because they weren't ready. They weren't ready for the end game and the ongoing content. It wasn't structured right. But then you're going to look at the games that did it and succeeded, and you're like, well, they weren't live service from moment one. Bull. Yes, they were. The only game we could point to right now that is very successful live service and an ongoing live service game that wasn't built that way from moment one would be No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky was never built to be what it is today, I don't think. I mean, it was built to be an ongoing experience that you could play with other people, and they eventually added all that in. But what it is right now with expeditions and seasonal characters and that seasonal grind, I don't think that was ever in their purview. I think that's been something that they've done as they've refined the formula. But I don't think we can look at probably the single greatest example of an ongoing live service game that is not a traditional MMO is Destiny. And Destiny was live service from moment one. They described it as such. They structured it as such. They literally delayed the game so that they could launch it in a live service format. And so that's why I think it's totally okay to look at a game like this that is saying from moment one, we're going to be an MMO looter shooter, an open world MMO looter shooter. You can totally do that. Destiny's 10-year plan was 3 games and DLC. That's the original plan. So you think a 10-year plan with 3 games, which means you're playing every single game for roughly 3 years, you think that those games are not live service. Then what are they? What is a game that you play for 3 years and then roll over into another game that you play for 3 years? What is that if it's not live service? I'm not saying it was intended to be the game that it is now, Eugene, but they clearly intended it to be a live service game. How on earth are you going to get me to play a game for 3 years if it's not live service? What is it then? If it's not live service, what is it? So if there was a Destiny 1, 2, 3, and they did a trilogy, each of those games roughly lasting for 3 years. Source said it was not their original intentions. No, that's accurate. Activision's contract was a new game every 2 to 3 years? That's in the Activision contract. They had no intentions of making sequels? That's false, Creature. That's in the contract. That's why they got out of the contract. Because the contract with Activision would have had them making another Destiny instead of continuing to stay in Destiny 2. That's verifiable. That is in the contract. The original initial plans were that was brought on by Activision, but that was the plan. That's why Destiny 2 landed when it landed. They were honoring the contract. That was not their original plan. How on earth could you know what the original plan is if the contract and the publisher has been there since moment one? What original plan are you referring to? One that predates Activision's involvement? Where is that plan? From the moment Activision was involved, that was the plan. A 10-year game, sequels every 2.5 years, roughly. That was the plan. At where are you getting your information? I don't think having a game that releases tentpoles and DLC that you come back to for some time is what we would call live service today. And you think that that's how Destiny 1 was designed. Go back and look at the original game design of Destiny 1 and try to tell me that with a straight face, Eugene. Really? Weekly resets? Daily and weekly bounties? Strikes, nightfalls, and raids? That was designed for you to play it and put it down and come back later at a DLC? No. Every fabric, every square inch of Destiny 1 from moment one was designed from the moment one of the launch. It was designed for you to keep playing. It was not designed for you to play through the story and put it down. Every square inch of Destiny 1 was to keep you playing. Just because they called it DLC instead of a season, it's the same idea. Hey, in 3 or 4 months, there's going to be new stuff for you to do, new things for you to go find. And while you wait to do that, what are you doing? You're doing daily and weekly ritualistic content. That's a live service game. Hey, we did an update. We fixed that thing. Hey, we're doing an event coming up. It'll let you grind for this new thing. I don't know when the first Iron Banner happened, but it was live service from moment one. You can't look at a game that's structured with weekly resets, daily resets, and be like, oh, yeah, it's not a live service game. When did Xur first start showing up? That's a live service element. A guy that shows up once a week, only on the weekends with the rotating inventory, that's a live service game. The content structure was live service from moment one. If not, why do you need daily and weekly resets? That's exactly what COD's been doing at least for 10 years, is COD live service. Where has COD been doing expansions and DLC? Where? COD was doing annual releases. Xur was there the first weekend. Yeah, you cannot look at the content rhythm and content structure of Destiny 1 and say with a straight face that it wasn't live service from moment one. It's absurd. It's absurd. Annual releases plus 4 DLCs a year? Oh, well, yeah, no, you would classify that as live service, Patrick. Sure. It's an ongoing experience where they expand and get you to keep coming back. Yeah, that's live service. COD is kind of the OG live service if you think about it. There was a reason to grind. There was a reason to get unlocks. There was a reason to keep coming back. Double XP weekends, and then they would do like new maps, and that's a reason to come back, and new guns, and then they were doing annual releases. So it's kind of hard to say it's live service, but they wanted you to be engaged for at least 9 months, and then they'd hand you off to the next game. Didn't they have the Queen's Wrath event even before Iron Banner? Yeah, you had Queen's Wrath event in one of the first DLCs. On paper, you cannot look at Destiny 1 with weekly resets, daily resets, weekly and daily bounties. You can't look at their content structure, the loot table, the way that Nightfalls rotated, the way that Xur showed up. You cannot look at that with a straight face and say, no, that wasn't live service. What the frick? How many games did you play back then that were like that? How many single player co-op or multiplayer games did you play like that? Like Borderlands wasn't like that. Borderlands wasn't doing daily and weekly resets. There weren't rotating missions and drops and NPCs that would show up in Borderlands. Destiny was something new. You almost have to see Destiny as being a hinge in the live service conversation, because they were doing something that almost no games were doing unless they were an MMO. Yes, MMOs are considered live service. Like, up to that point, the only games that were doing weekly, daily resets and weekly and daily bounties and rotating missions and quests and things to do with groups of people, like, up to that point, there were only games that were doing it were MMOs. And Destiny comes on the scene and is like, $60, come play our game. We have daily and weekly resets. We have rotating missions and quests that have rotating drops. There were unique drops, I believe. There weren't unique drops in the Nightfalls for a long time. You ran the Nightfalls for strange coins and a chance at an exotic, and then you'd use the strange coins when Xur shows up. I don't know how you can look at the rhythmic nature of that content loop and say, well, that's not live service. the only part of the argument that it doesn't make sense to me, but the only part of the argument that's been substantiated is, well, they weren't doing seasonal yet, they were doing DLC. Yeah, but look at the rest of the game's structure. The fabric of Destiny 1, as soon as it hit the ground, the fabric of the game was live service. It was immediately live service because it was structured. It borrowed so much. It borrowed so much from the MMO genre. As part of the terms of the deal, Bungie was to develop Destiny games for Activision for 10 years, though the developer has since clarified that the 10-year roadmap was never concrete. When we first launched our partnership with Activision in 2010, the gaming industry was in a different place. Their OG plan was to make a WoW in their world, one singular, ongoing, never-ending world, and the idea of that not happening splintered their team. People left over it. That's how the story got fragmented. That is not true, Creature. No. Writers left, composers left, people walked. Yes, but you're misrepresenting what happened. The writers, composers left, all those people left when they busted up Joseph Staten's supercut. You're making it up? You are making it up. Substantiate it. Where's the article? The article that talked about what you're talking about was when Joseph Staten's supercut got busted up, a bunch of people left after that. His supercut was described as being campy, cutscene heavy, and very linear. And you're claiming that that vision was an MMO World of Warcraft game. His supercut was described as being campy and being cutscene heavy and very linear. That's not an MMO. I posted an article. I posted a link. Yeah, but that's not what we're talking about. That's from 2019. I'm looking for the interview article. I'm telling you right now, you're conflating things, because when all those people left, they left after the supercut was busted up and they delayed the game for a year. That was why Joseph Staten left. That was why Marty left. Marty became like a problem at the company. I remember covering this. I remember talking about this. I did whole videos and discussions on it. Their OG vision was one single ongoing experience world. I don't ever remember reading a single article that said they originally wanted to build an ongoing world like World of Warcraft, and when they decided not to do that, people left. Because again, the supercut that Joseph Staten put together was not that. Signing on with Activision crushed that? I don't remember ever reading that. I don't know if that's even in Schreier's article. Who went back and got more info than him? Or I'm sorry, Schreier did the article on Anthem. Did he do an article on Bungie and Destiny 1? I think we're taking our 2022 ideas and imposing them on 2015. That's what I'm saying. I don't think there's any interview, any article anywhere that says, well, before we signed with Activision, we wanted to build an MMORPG. And then we signed with Activision, and they didn't want to do that, and then a bunch of people left. All the composers and people that left after Joseph Staten's supercut was broken apart. And his supercut getting broken apart was them saying, we don't want to build a linear, campy, cutscene-driven game. We want to build a game that people continue to play. And that's when people left. Which sounds like the inverse of what you're saying. It's like, they're like, we want to build an ongoing game that people live in for 10 years. You're trying to build some linear Halo-type game, and we don't want to do that. I don't understand how Staten built what he built, and then the higher-ups rejected it, and then people left. You're saying before that even happened, there was a vision of the game that got rejected, and then people left? I don't ever remember reading that or seeing that. God of War is a successful game and isn't live service? I don't know what you mean. Oh, well, yeah, there's plenty of successful games that aren't live service. You guys are talking years after what I'm speaking on. I can't find the interview, but I will. I feel like some of this is imagined, which sounds condescending. I'm not trying to be condescending. That sounds imagined. I'm supposed to believe that somebody sat down and threw Activision under the bus and said, well, we were going to build an ongoing like World of Warcraft style game, and then Activision came in and squashed it, and so a bunch of us left. That would have been tectonic. That would have made huge headlines. I've been in the trenches with that game since before most of you knew what the game was. Homie, I was watching dev diaries and trailers before I was a content creator. I've been following that game from moment one. From moment one. The only thing I didn't get to do was play the alpha. And I don't ever remember ever reading anything about that. I remember reading the Kotaku article that said State and Supercut got rejected. They delayed a game a year and broke the game in pieces. And when they did that, a bunch of people left. You're describing that. Because when you say writers and composers left, you're right. That's when they left. There wasn't some other exodus before that. If there was, I never read about it. And I feel like I would have. I feel like I would have read about this mass exodus after Activision stepped in of writers and composers, which what writers and composers would have left? Marty and Staten were imports from Halo. So who are we talking about? And those were writers and composers that left after Staten Supercut was rejected. Marty and Staten. Like, Marty and Staten are OG Bungie. Hang on. We're okay, we're good on time. We gotta get out of here. Because we're off rails. We gotta go. Remember. Here we go. They had moved on from the WoW model during that frame. If I'm telling you, you ain't gonna be able to find the interview. I don't think that interview exists. I think there are interviews when they broke with Activision where they said things like that, and I think you're taking that and you're conflating it with when Staten and Marty left and there was this big disruption at the company and people were really angry. I think you're taking those two and they've they've like melded excuse me. They've like melded in your mind as a memory. They've like mixed together. I feel like I uncovered and looked at every rock, every stone, every possible explanation for what happened to that game. I covered it and talked about it. And there was just never a time where I read, oh, they were wanting to build a World of Warcraft style game and Activision squashed it. We read the opposite. What we read was Marty and Staten were trying to build a linear, campy, cutscene heavy game, and that's what got squashed, and that's when a bunch of people left. A bunch of people left at that point in time. There was basically, they couldn't reconcile, there was like irreconcilable differences or whatever the frick you want to call it. It was like, this is the game we wanted to build. We believed in Staten's vision. We believed in their vision for the game, and when they rejected that, they all walked. You're adding chat's interpretation of my words. Their OG vision was a single ongoing experience world. If that was their OG vision, then why did Joseph Staten build a linear cutscene heavy experience that was rejected and then busted up to build an ongoing world? That's why I'm super confused. It was never their plan to make a WoW? You said their plan was to make a WoW in their world. One singular, ongoing, never-ending world. That's what you typed. I'm reading it 10 minutes ago. Not their OG plan. Their plan was to make a WoW in their world. One singular, ongoing, never-ending world. It's 10 minutes ago. I didn't make up WoW. You typed it. Yeah, that's the Kotaku article. And I'm telling you, you've flipped the whole thing backwards. They tried to make something linear and campy, and when that was rejected and they broke the game up to be an ongoing world, that's when Joseph and Marty left. I don't know if there's some version before that. Like, what you're saying doesn't make sense with the timeline. So, like, they wanted to build a single ongoing experience, like WoW, and then Activision steps in and squashes that. And then Marty puts together a supercut that's linear and campy and cutscene heavy, and they break that apart to make an ongoing world video game. What? And then that's why people laughed. Like, you see what I'm saying? Why would they say, no, we're not going to do an ongoing game, and then a bunch of people leave, and then they break up Marty's supercut to build an ongoing game? That timeline doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. But the Splinter was signing with Activision, you know that? I don't know that. I don't remember ever reading an article that there was a mass exodus when they signed with Activision. The mass exodus happened when they broke up Staten's supercut. Staten and Marty took a bunch of people with them, basically. You're saying there was another exodus before that, and I don't think that that's true. I don't think there's any articles or interviews to substantiate that. I would have read about it. That was a split with Activision when they finally called D2 an MMO after years of denying it. We gotta hang on. We gotta go to members. If you want to continue discussing this with me and not have your talk show disrupted, you need to come over and hit join and become a member. We are getting ready to go to a members only video, and I'm gonna send out a post, and then we are gonna be playing some more DMZ today. I kind of want to grind it and see if we can't get into a rhythm with it. Maybe we have some people around that are really good at it. Last members only before I leave town. Post. Okay. So we'll be back. This is like our lunch break. We take a lunch break. I hang out with the members, and then I'll be back for a second stream today. We'll be checking out more DMZ. Thanks so much for clicking on this video. If you're a member, I am going to be gone for about a week. This is November the 18th, and it's the last members-only stream before I leave town. We will not be doing a Friday night stream with Madam. It just wasn't going to work. You know, having like a late night drinking stream before I hop on the road wasn't going to be a good idea. While I'm gone, the week of Thanksgiving, so November the 21st to the 25th, this channel will get an upload every morning so that at least you can have your ritual of something happening on the channel every morning. Streams will resume on the 28th. Make sure between now and then you upgrade to a full membership. You need to go to your perks page, your channels and memberships page, and get off the $5 base membership. Go up for $1, $6 full membership. Do that before December. I'm going to end the previous stream. We looked at Project LLL gameplay, and we discussed live service games and all the different things. I'm going to bring all those people over. If you guys don't want to ride redirect, use the link in